Good evening, everyone. So, did you go through the question that I had given you for practice yesterday? Okay, let's continue our discussion. Yesterday, what we were discussing was this question based on internationalization, which is one of the provisions, suggestions under your national education policy. So the question says the quality of higher education in India requires major improvements to make it internationally competitive. Do you think that the entry of foreign education institutions would help improve the quality of technical and higher education in the country? So if you remember, we were saying that this question primarily talks about the quality of education, quality of technical and higher education in the country. So remember, when you try to answer this question, do not think about school education. Just stick to quality of technical and higher education in our country. Now, how can we introduce this? What all has to be covered in the body part? And how about the conclusion? So the statement says the quality of higher education in India requires major improvements to make it internationally competitive. So one way of starting this can be something related to, or any fact related to, the quality of higher education in India that you can talk about. We do not have any institutions when it comes to globally top ranked institutions. Similarly, you can think of a balanced introduction wherein you say that the quality of our education is good, but we have to put in more efforts. We have to make it even better so that it becomes internationally competitive. So there can be a balanced introduction because you do not outrightly have to say that the quality of education in India is not good, right? Because we have a lot of scientists, we have a lot of, say, highly qualified professionals, which companies from other countries seek. So you can think of a balanced introduction. Now, can you please suggest any other kind of introduction that we can take up? So one is about the quality of higher education, maybe a few problems related to higher education, right? Your national education policy has highlighted a lot of problems. So maybe you can start with those problems as well. So yes, great. Vaishna is saying we can also think of other ways apart from internationalization to make it good. Great. To make education better. Amazing. Also, okay, Abhishek is suggesting that we can contextualize this question. How do we do that? That we can cite any kind of recent examples. Right, but at that time, actually, it was in the news, yes, but there were no uh, institutions who were actually talking about opening their campuses here. So yes, if you think of this question now, you have examples to contextualize this question. Okay, so these can be four kinds of introduction. You can mix and match It need not necessarily be, say, in a watertight compartment, that you talk only about quality of higher education or you talk about just other ways. You can have a balance. And I hope you're trying these suggestions. So the way I'm suggesting that, okay, you can try with this introduction, maybe you can mix and match introduction. I hope you're trying in your answers and just looking at the response that you get. So please do that. Just write the answers, send it across and see whether the suggestions that we are giving in the class are actually working or not. Now think of conclusion. Think of conclusion. What can be a conclusion? Or maybe we can think of body part. Yesterday we had discussed the body part in slight detail, and we will go through it. We have the answer here. You have the answer here. Do not worry about it. This is your body part. Right, so your body part, will come back to it. Just think of what can be a conclusion, because they have asked for your suggestion that whether entry of foreign educational institutions will actually help us improve the quality of education or not. They have asked your suggestion. So say you take up one side, you say that yes, it will definitely in the body, if you say yes, and you say that yes, it will definitely help us improve the quality of education, you can briefly mention the apprehensions in your conclusion, that there can be problems related to this as well. And if you think that no, it will not help us improve the quality, which I believe most of you would not, because ultimately it is about quality. We're not yet talking about the regulatory mechanism, etc. We're just talking primarily about how it can help us improve the quality. So if you think of an answer of no, you will not get many points for that matter. So it is better you go with the statement, you go with the flow, that yes, it will help us improve the quality of technical and higher education in India. Then you, in conclusion, you highlight the apprehensions, plus briefly you can give suggestions to fix the same. So your conclusion is not going to get a lot of weightage, but yes, you can include both these parts. Anything apart from this that you can suggest? Okay, so we can suggest other alternatives as well. So yes, if you do not take up other alternatives to improve the quality of higher education in your introduction, you can take it up in your conclusion part. Okay, so Vaishta is saying that we can suggest how we can facilitate the entry of foreign institutions in India. Yes, definitely you can. No, let's not, Anurag, let's not go towards writing the benefits of higher education, because the question is not centered around that idea. It is primarily talking about how we can improve the quality of higher education. Yes, so okay, so these are a few ways in which you can draft your answer, write this answer. Just go with what you feel or what you deem fit for this question. Okay, so there are multiple ways to write the answer, as we discuss in every question, that there are multiple ways to write those questions. Now just think about the body part. How is it that the entry of foreign educational institutions will help us improve the quality? How? Because if you look at the foreign universities, they put a lot of emphasis on research. So it will inculcate the spirit of research here in our country as well. Then you get to know about the international practices, that how is it that they are taking up the matters of education, because they'll have different teaching styles, they'll have they'll have different kinds of assessments, etc., which can help you improve the quality. Then it can improve the quality by collaborating with Indian institutions, because once those institutions are established here, Indian universities, Indian colleges will also collaborate with them in matters of research, in matters of, say, designing the curriculum, etc. Then you can also write about the other ideas, that it increases the number of options that a student has. Now these students have those universities available here, because ultimately, rather than going to say a substandard university, they'll have an option of going to a better university. Also, those teachers will come here right? The teachers who are teaching in these foreign institutions, they'll also come here. But again, it is a question whether they recruit their teachers from here within the country, or they recruit teachers from other countries, or maybe they take in teachers from from those institutions. So those teachers will help improve the quality. Also, if you see that those institutions are actually the better ranked ones, they have a good global ranking, so it is very obvious that the quality of teachers, the quality of teaching is going to be good there. So our teachers also would have to become competitive, which will ultimately improve the quality of education here. But then the apprehension is, how do you take care of the regulation part, which is under question, right? Okay, so these are the ways in which you can answer this question, and I hope it, because it was a fairly simple question. Even if you think of the previous year, it was a simple question because it was being discussed every now and then in your newspapers. Coming back to other parts, so internationalization is done. Internationalization, one way is letting global institutions, foreign institutions, open up their campuses here. Then the other idea is Indian institutions opening their campuses in other countries, opening their campuses abroad. Now remember, if they have asked a question specifically on one dimension, that is internationalization, they can definitely ask a question about how to improve the teacher quality, about how say the introduction of vocational education or the introduction of various flexibility mechanisms will help improve the quality of education. So the way we have discussed, I think you can pretty much answer these questions. So we have critically analyzed those suggestions as well. So be prepared. If they can ask a question on one dimension, they can definitely ask a question on other dimensions as well. Now we were talking about the introduction of vocational education. So we are saying that, or your national education policy was saying that from your secondary standard, from your secondary education, let's introduce vocational education. And you will understand, you have already understood the benefits, because now our education will emphasize more on practical knowledge. Students will have hands-on experience, they'll learn, because ultimately it is when you work, if you go to a workplace, you'll find it is not only about the learnings you had from your education, but there are a lot of other things that you have to be disciplined. You have to reach your school, the way you have to reach your school in time, you have to reach your workplace in time. Then how do you conduct yourself in that work environment? So it will emphasize on the interpersonal skills, etc. Now, what is the problem? That in India, we do not have a lot of people who actually undergo any kind of skill training. So as highlighted yesterday, it is close to 4 to 5% of our population that actually goes through any kind of skilling. So introducing this vocational education with starting from your secondary standard, ranging to your higher education, will actually help you develop more skills. Then they're talking about a national mission for mentoring, wherein they will take help of your retired faculties, retired professionals, to improve the quality. Those professionals can get in touch with your teachers, with your existing education system. They can help them with their suggestions as to how to improve the quality of education. What is it that is troubling students, etc. With their experience, they can help the current education system. So these were the few suggestions. These were the few suggestions from your national education policy. What we did was we looked at education in two parts. One is school education and the other one is higher education. In school education, we highlighted a few issues based on the ASER report, ASER 22 report. Then we highlighted a few issues from your national education policy, and then we looked at all those problems in the light of suggestions from your national education policy. Then we moved on to higher education. We looked at All India Survey for Higher Education, highlighted a few problems from there. Then we highlighted a few problems from your national education policy, and then we looked at the suggestions. How is it we can improve on those aspects? So please be prepared to get a question. So be prepared to get any kind of question from all these dimensions. But yes, whatever is there in your current affairs will become more important, right? So right now, the idea of internationalization of say Indian universities opening up their campuses abroad is being discussed. So it can become important. Similarly, once they start implementing various provisions of the policy, they will automatically find place in your newspapers and will help you think about what kind of questions can be asked. Okay, so now I hope with the kind of discussions that we are having right from the beginning, you are aware that if this kind of issue is found in your newspapers, how you can use it to formulate your answers. Okay. Okay, so Gulam is saying that he writes the answers for social issues. It is very easy, but need more points to get more marks. So see, it is not just about having more number of points, right? You have to enrich your content. It does not mean that you have to increase the word limit or you have to extend the number of words that you are writing. You have to enrich it. You have to make it even more dense, and that will come with practice. So if there is something in the current affairs, you will, if you keep writing, you will try to integrate those in your answers. And that is something that is actually going to help you get better marks. Okay, so moving on to our next part, that is impact of globalization on education. How do you think about impact of globalization on Indian education system? So what you have to think about is various aspects of education system in India. Think about the language or the medium of instruction. Think about the introduction of scientific and your technical education, right? Apart from this, what can be the other aspects? So right now we are looking at the aspects in which we find that globalization has an impact on education. So yes, to a great extent, it can be about teaching style. Just think about this, the dialectical method of Socrates, right? So yes, you find that it was there in the ancient past, but now it is increasingly being adopted in the West as, say, medium of instruction or as a way of teaching. And from there, we also get cues. We also understand. We look at those methods, we appreciate those methods, and we ultimately experiment with those methods here. Think of your curriculum, how it gets impacted by globalization. Think of the availability of books and other study material. With globalization, now you have books. Even if you look at UPSC, even if you look at civil services examination, when it comes to your various optional papers, you find that most of the books that you read are actually by your foreign authors. More than Indian authors, we appreciate and we use their books. Similarly, think of digitization because of globalization. Digitization of education. That with globalization, take example of your Zoom platform, right, which is extensively being used across the country to improve or to actually access digital education. What can be other impacts of globalization on education? So yes, now that we are talking about vocational education, it is also coming from globalization. We look at other countries, we compare our workforce with other countries, and we decide that yes, vocational education is something that has to be introduced. Great. So yes, content of teaching, syllabus, etc. Now introduction of newer languages. Introduction of newer languages in our curriculum. So even your national education policy talks about exposure to at least one of the foreign languages. Increase competition, right? Now with globalization, you can think of internationalization as well. Internationalization in terms of what your national education policy has suggested, right? Opening up of global campuses in India. Think of students now traveling abroad to get higher quality education, to get newer skills, etc. And now just when you think of these, you can think of negatives and positives. That because of the change of medium of instruction, people coming from, or students coming from socioeconomically backward regions, from socioeconomically backward classes, they are at a disadvantage. They are at a disadvantage compared to other students. Similarly, if we talk about the more push towards scientific education, we find that we are losing our values. We are losing the Indian ethos, and that's why your national education policy talks about emphasizing on Indian ethos and values. So all these things, all these aspects can have both positive and negative effects. All these things have actually been discussed with your national education policy. All you have to do is you have to look at these aspects in the light of globalization. Right, in the light of globalization, that's what you have to do. So yes, it is diversifying choices, etc. Great. This was one aspect. The other idea is of digitization, that your national education policy also talks about digitizing our education, using online programs, having e-libraries, etc. And you can very well address this question, that how digitization can actually increase the access, can actually make education more affordable, can enrich it with the availability of multiple resources. But at the same time, there'll be problems. There'll be problems related to digital divide. There'll be problems related to misuse of internet. There'll be problems related to data privacy, right? So all these things have actually been discussed. Why I have left it here is so that when you actually revise, if at all you do, when you revise your content after the class, you just write down those points. So it'll be a brainstorming exercise, because you would have to use all the content that has been provided, that has been discussed in the class, and put everything together in one place. So it'll be a good brainstorming exercise for you. Right. So please do this exercise as your homework. All these things have been discussed very well during the course of lecture. So please just condense all the content, write it here, use as many examples from current affairs as you can. Now let's move to the next part, that is of skill development. So we were talking about vocational education there. Now when you think of skill development in terms of employability, that if you do not have sufficient skills, you will not be employable. Apart from this, the other dimension is that of your entrepreneurship. That we do not just need people who work for others, who work in companies, who work for the government, but we do need people, we need more and more such people who can actually help us create more employment, who can actually contribute better to the GDP, right? So when you think of skill development, think in both these directions. Now what we'll do is, not entrepreneurship, it starts with E. Okay. So when you look at skill development, the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to take points from your skill development policy, right? And we will look at the issues and suggestions together. And when we talk about skill development, it is one aspect of human resources, right? If you look at the syllabus, it talks about education, health, and human resources. So human resources in education, your teachers have been discussed there. Human resources related to health, that is your doctors and other health professionals, have been discussed there. Now this is a general overview of skill development. And when you think of skill development, think of people who work for companies, who work for the government, and also think of people who actually create employment, who become entrepreneurs. So there'll be problems and suggestions on both sides. Now, when it comes to entrepreneurship, you have more content actually coming from your economy lectures. Compared to what we are going to discuss here, you'll have more and more content coming from there. Okay, so sorry. Okay, you are talking about entrepreneurship. That means working or maybe entrepreneurship within the existing company. The idea can be understood as, for example, you work for an automobile company and they are, say, they are talking about building new infrastructure or maybe opening up newer showrooms, etc. So maybe you can become a part of that activity as well. Apart from working in that company, you can take up those things as well. So maybe you can become a supplier, you can help them with logistics, etc. Now, what is the significance of skill development? Just remember this idea that when uh, uh, when we were talking about Indian population, we were saying that we have more proportion of young people in our population compared to the older ones, right? So our population is primarily young, and we were talking about this young population in terms of youth bulge, that the proportion of young people in our population is more compared to the elderly. Now, if and related to this, we discussed the idea of demographic dividend, that we have to skill these people, we have to educate these people, we have to provide employment to these people so that they can ultimately contribute to the national development agenda. So we see that India is primarily a young population, the population is high, and there is actually increasing dependence on your young population. So if you remember the dependency ratio, it is actually getting skewed more towards the elderly, that they are going to depend more and more on this working age population. Now, also, when you think of skill development, do not just think of skill development related to a young, but you also have to think in terms of other categories as well. So we are not starting skill development for that working age population. We are trying to skill our children. We are also trying to include more and more of our retired seniors in our system to help us with whatever economic activity that we are taking up. So we have to convert this youth bulge into demographic dividend, and that is why we need to skill these people. Now, what are the issues related to this? What are various issues and what can be the suggestions? Just think about this. The first thing that we will highlight is that we do not have, say, vocational education as part of our education system, so that right from a young age, we start skilling our students. Then you'll talk about the employability aspect. You'll say that yes, a person can get educated, the person can go through the higher education system, but they still do not have enough skills to get employed in the industries, which becomes a problem. Similarly, then you'll think about the contribution of women to your economy, or the working women to your economy, that we do not have a huge proportion of women working, or a huge proportion of working women. Then what can be the other ideas or other issues that you can highlight? Okay, so Amesh is talking about yesterday's newspaper, wherein it was talking about the increasing dependency ratio. That, and if you remember, when discussing population, we were saying that the population of elderly is actually on the rise, which might become a problem in the future. And in a couple of states, particularly Kerala, you find that the proportion of elderly has grown close to 17-18%, which is huge. Yes, exactly, Santosh. So Santosh, Ambesh, okay, it was in today's newspaper, sorry, so I keep forgetting when I read it. So yes, these aspects have already been discussed, right? So you're talking about social security. So if the population of elderly goes on rising, we have to shell out more resources for pension. Who takes care of their health needs, right? Who takes care of their other social security needs? So the government would have to spend more. Similarly, we need more number of healthcare professionals to take care of them. So all these aspects, if you remember, have been covered very well when we were discussing population. Okay, so let's come back to our agenda, that is of skill development. We are trying to highlight the issues and also come up with suggestions. So Vaishya says that the ones who are actually better skilled, they look for opportunities abroad. That means in a country, we do not value skills very well. That means we do not remunerate people according to their skills. In foreign countries, in other countries, you will find that right now and for the past decade or so, you find more and more number of our students and our working professionals actually looking for jobs and education opportunities abroad. Why? Because they are better in terms of remuneration, better in terms of other perks. They get to live or they get to experience a better lifestyle, right? They get more exposure, etc. These are the reasons because of which there is a brain drain. There is a huge number of our working population either going out to work or staying here and working for companies abroad. How can we fix that issue? To make the system, make those things better here, right? So make our jobs more remunerative. Think about the working hours. Think about the work-life balance. Those of you here who are working, you'll find that if you are not actually working for an MNC or corporate, and if you end up working for an Indian startup or an Indian company, you'll find that there is no work-life balance. So you find that the working hours stretch beyond the ones mandated, beyond the ones that you have actually legally agreed upon. That is 8 to 9 hours every day. Also, then your week off is not your complete week off. You face a problem because if, say, someone from your office calls up and says that this is an important assignment which you would have to take up, then your weekly off gets compromised, right? So these are a few problems related to, say, work-life balance, related to how remunerative a job can be, related to the approach. So if you look at these MNCs, then you'll find that the idea of cooperative society is actually followed there, but with the more level of professionalism. So yes, people are ready to contribute, but they maintain a gap, they maintain a distance. They do not let their work cross the line and move into their personal lives. And also at the same time, there is more if you look at the floor, there is more or less equity. So everyone is being treated equally. You do not find most of the decisions coming from the top. So essentially it is in most of the MNCs, if you find in smaller processes, I'm not talking about the say bigger business decisions, but you'll find that in most of the MNCs, it is essentially a bottom-up process, that all the stakeholders are gathered either online or on the floor, and they discuss, they deliberate that what has to be the course of action. And if you compare that with what we have here in Indian companies, it is completely different, right? Similarly, there can be other issues. Let's look at all those issues and suggestions one by one. So one idea that we were discussing yesterday was that society has, again, its own way of stratifying things. So we put more value, or we attach more value to a few kinds of work, and then we do not attach any value at all to other kinds of work. So when we are talking about vocational education in our schools, in our secondary schools, if you think of your good private schools, right, primarily in urban areas, do you think most of the parents would agree that, okay, let our children, say, get into pottery or learn something related to carpentry? Do you think it'll be that easy? Because the parents will start protesting that ultimately you have to make them, say, you have to skill them according to the changing needs. You have to skill them according to better kinds of employment opportunity. You have to skill them, or you have to educate them so that they take admissions in Harvard, etc. universities. And they would not agree to that. Why? Because if you look at the basic idea around it, we find that when it comes to any kind of work which actually needs more of physical efforts, we do not appreciate those, right? So if it comes to any kind of job where you have to work manually, where you have to use hands, you find that people do not want to take up. And yesterday I had asked you a similar question, whether a sanitation worker or maybe someone else, or an Instagrammer or an entertainer, because that entertainer can be on social media, that entertainer can be say a global entertainer. What kind of work do you attach more value to? And it is entirely up to you. It is ultimately your decision, your It is up to you how you think about those aspects, right? So I'm not going to get into the ethical dimension, but yes, that question was primarily based on this. And I actually, because we are running out of time, I could not relate it to vocational education yesterday. So think about this. So even though our policy talks about providing vocational education, but you'll find that because ultimately the mindset is so that people view the status as being inversely proportional to the degree to which one works with one's hands. So there is a possibility that the parents might protest, that the schools might also protest, that we do not want to include this because ultimately it would not be good for our business. So what can be the solution for this? What can be the solution for this? What can be the solution for this problem? Now, I know it would not come that easy, right? Because it'll be more theoretical, it'll be more philosophical, that we look at any kind of work value neutrally, which is not possible because of our socialization. Because if you think of the idea of success, just think of the idea of success. Everyone here will have a different idea of success, that is for sure. But you'll find that there are close to 90% similarities in that idea of success. So everyone wants, because this is the thing with your socialization, because you would not be able to think beyond that. The idea of success can be different for different people, but mostly it is imposed. It has become internalized what society vouches for. So yes, you would not have, say, good suggestion, right, related to this problem. So yes, you're saying that ultimately, even if it comes to farmers, they are not looked upon as someone who actually contribute greatly to our economy, who contribute to our food security. So you're talking about mandating this vocational education. Okay, great. Okay, now remember, yes, so counsel parents well, etc. Now just remember, yesterday we were talking about making children a part of their learning process, right? So that learning process actually starts from your surroundings. If you can at least motivate them to help the school administration to keep their surroundings clean, right? The Japanese model that I was talking about, or you think of, forget about Japanese model, you think of the old ancient Gurukul system, the Gurukul system in our country, right? There were ones who were talking about the traditional education system. So rather than taking up something related to religion, we can think of moral values that were there. So ultimately, if we shift, or the way national education policy puts it across, if we try to include or integrate your Indian ethos, Indian values, the Indian value system, traditional Indian value system, it will actually be better. Okay, then moving on to the next part. When you think of your small scale industries particularly, you'll find that people who have a better qualification are working at the same level. Then people who have a diploma are also working at the same level. People who might have an MTech, they are also working at the same level. They get paid equally. Yes. Now the problem is that the problem primarily is that of the excess availability of your human resources, that we have more number of people who are actually seeking jobs compared to the number of employment opportunities that we have. So they have no option but to agree to whatever is being offered, right? They do not have a lot of say scope for negotiation. And if you think of this, these industries, particularly these local industries, they do not say think of treating your skilled and unskilled people differently. They treat them equally without thinking about, if someone is an engineer, if someone has a better degree, they would know more. They can actually help you grow your business, right? Why merely keep them at the same level as that of a diploma holder. So I'm not talking about, say, attaching more value to a degree than diploma. Yes, obviously, if a person who has a diploma, who is more experienced, who has a better skill set, should be treated like that. That is not the thing. But the idea is treating your skilled and unskilled labor at par. That is what the problem is. Then moving on, if you look into the various programs of your central government over the years, now it has changed. Over the years, you find that it was very fragmented. So various ministries and departments were having their own skill development programs, and there was no integration. There was no collaboration among those departments. But now with your Ministry of Skill Development, everything has been integrated. But also, you can still question the effectiveness of those programs. You'll find that yes, there are a lot of free programs, vocational courses for all the sections of society. But do they actually help them with the placements? Do they actually track their success? Do they look into factors like whether the industry is retaining those employees or not? And at the very basic level, do they at all think about the employability? Because the skills that they are actually imparting, most of them are outdated. The industry does not require all those skills. So yes, you are imparting skills, you are developing skills in those people, but those skills and the demand of the industry have a lot of gap. So ultimately, all those vocational courses, your skill development programs go in vain. What can be the solution to this? What can be the solution to this? Yes, so Santosh is talking about providing courses which have higher demand in the market, so that students actually get a job afterwards. So not just government, Amish, when you think of skill development, the idea should not just be limited to central government or your government. It should be extended to your private players as well. You have a lot of free online courses from your private players as well. Okay, just think about this. We are saying that there is a gap between the skills provided in various skill development programs, the skills and the learnings that you get from your school and higher education, and the industry. So the industry says, we are ready to employ people, but provide us employable people. That is what the argument of industry is. So to bridge this gap, what can you do is, you take people from the industry to help people develop skills. So if you have, just think about this, if you have, before your placement drives in your colleges, if you get people from your industry, say in your third year, fourth year, if they give you exposure to industry, they bring in people, experienced people from industry who help you develop those skills, ultimately you will be more employable. You would know what the real-time demand is. So there has to be a collaboration between the government and industry to make these people more employable. But what is the benefit that the industry will get? The industry will be benefit in the sense that now they have more employable people. So in industry, if say, for example, your any kind of accounting firm or any legal firm, if they collaborate with a university or maybe with the government, what they can do is, whatever skills that they need in their industry, those skills can be imparted in the students over a period of 6 months or 1 year, and then employ these people or employ these students in your industry, have a contract, right? A few companies do that. They come to your college in your third and fourth year, and they take you up for your summer training, right? Wherein they will give you exposure to the industry, they'll help you learn those skills, but they'll make you sign a contract that once you get the certification, you are liable to work for a company for at least 1 or 2 years. They'll make you sign a bond. So it is the best case scenario. It is a best case scenario. So the students already have this thing in mind that yes, ultimately I have a company that I can work for. I have job security in the future tomorrow. And also the company knows that I already have someone who's skilled. I already have someone who has already been trained, who is going to work for us tomorrow. So yes, you can also think of lopside, that if the student sits for another placement and they get a better company in the future, should they switch or not? Right, that can become an ethical question, but just think about the linkages between the industry and your skill development sector. So this addresses two of your problems. One problem is to bridge that gap between the industry and your skills, and also it helps you to have better trainers, right? Because when it comes to skill development, trainers play an important role. Now, if those trainers are actually coming from industry, if those trainers are already experienced, they'll be in a better position to help you get those skills. So yes, so this idea of collaboration, because I feel it can become an important question, that how collaboration or integration of your various skill development programs with the industry can help in skill development. So I think of it as a potential question. So it actually answers most of your questions. Now your skill development or now your training is more oriented towards application. Now your education, if say they start in third year, fourth year, they say now your education is also more oriented towards employability. Also, you have better trainers, you have better linkages with the industry, you have exposure to the industry at an earlier age. So all those problems that we find can actually be addressed using this. So yes, Santosh, I have read your suggestion, and that's why I mentioned this, right? So the efficiency, the efficacy of your various skill development programs by your government can be questioned, and how you can address that issue. So yes, guest lectures by your various industry experts. Great. So because this will actually help, it will help not just the students, but it will help teachers as well. Because think about this, now you have growing emphasis towards artificial intelligence. Now if these industry experts go to the colleges, visit colleges, one problem is solved, that the students can become more employable, the industry can have better employed individuals tomorrow, employees tomorrow. Then also these experts, these trainers will get in touch with your teachers. Now your teachers will also get to know in what direction they have to teach. What are the new things that are happening? Because generally you find that most of your teachers, lecturers, professors in your colleges, they're not aware of the newer technologies that are coming up. So they would also know, they would also get benefited, and ultimately their learnings will pass on to the students. So not just the students in that particular batch, but the students who are going to come in the future also get benefited. So if you find that all these things, all these issues and suggestions have been mentioned here, apart from that, you find most of our workforce is actually employed in the unorganized sector, which makes it difficult to tap our organized or to tap our workforce at the education level, right? We see that close to 28 or 30% of our students enroll in our higher education. So yes, a lot of them get good jobs, but a lot of them do not get good jobs, right? So at least you can tap that 30%. But what about the other 70% who dropped out at your school level, who dropped out at secondary level? You have to tap those students as well, right? So that's why your policy talks about making special provisions, special institutions for students who have dropped out. So either skill them or maybe bring them back in the education system, right? Also, if you think of our various states, now there are states which have say a superb service sector. Then there are states where you have a lot of natural resources. You have states where you have automobile industries. Now it is different for each and every state. So why not skill people according to the availability of jobs, according to the industry requirements of that particular state? Because with this, we solve the problem created by urbanization. With this, we solve the problem, other problems like people who have to migrate, they will change the demography of both the regions, ultimately regionalism, etc., etc. So all those problems can be solved. Why? Because now you're skilling people according to the local needs and demands of the industry, and those people can now get absorbed, those employees can now get absorbed within that state. So yes, the only lopside that you see is people would not have more choices. But we are not saying that to skill all in that same particular skill. If there are people coming from a state which has a rich, say, automobile industry, you are not training everyone for that industry, because ultimately that industry has a limit to which it can absorb people, absorb employees. According to the choice, according to what they feel right, you can skill them. But yes, more emphasis can be given on equipping them well for the local industry. So yes, all these points, if you see, have been discussed. We are saying that the skill development landscape has been largely devoid of industry and employer linkages, and we saw that how it can actually be better. Then availability of good quality trainers is a major area of concern, as highlighted by Santosh. Then education is not linked to industry skills in demand, etc. All these points have been discussed. Then we were talking about increasing the participation of women in the labor force, because their labor force participation rates are low. And now you see that previously all the skill development programs meant for women were more or less enforcing those gender stereotypes, right? If you remember, I think we have discussed this with women. But now they are actually working on various courses, various vocational training programs for women, so that they can work in each and every section or each and every industry. Right? They're skilling them in ICT, they're skilling them in other kinds of jobs. Why? Because one, it leads to women empowerment, and then women being half of our population, one is for their betterment, and the other point is that these women, if skilled, they will help themselves, they'll help their family, they'll also help the economy to grow. They'll also help the industry, because now your industrial force, your forces, your workforce in your service sector, etc., will be more diverse. Then also think of the problems related to entrepreneurship. Think of the problems related to entrepreneurship. One is we do not have skill development programs for entrepreneurs. Now you see that the government is working in that direction, right? You have incubation centers, etc. They are integrating various programs with your college education. So your education system has to work in that way as well. Why wait for government? Why always wait for the government? So think of the idea of multidisciplinary universities, right in the direction. Think of various initiatives of the ministries, right in this direction. But ultimately, there are various hurdles. Ultimately, there are a lot of hurdles, because the idea of entrepreneurship, like for example, the ideas that you're getting now are about big startups. We do not think of setting up small businesses that can actually help local industry or local society. You can employ people from there, because ultimately it is it's not that the local businesses that you'll set up will not pay as good, right? It's not that they'll be not that profitable. They will be profitable as well. At the same time, if you look at most of our startups, they are not profitable. Yes, there is a lot of glitter around it, but they are not profitable for that matter. Yes, they employ a lot of people. Everything looks fine from the outside, but on the inside, it is not that rigid. The structure is not that rigid. So rather than having big businesses, let's set up small businesses everywhere. Why? Because most of your people are already in your unorganized sector. Why not tap that potential? Why do we just limit our all the efforts to people who are already skilled, to people who are in the organized sector? Why not tap the other potential? Because generally the idea with your unorganized sector is, we think that it is something not profitable, it is something where people are not skilled, people do not understand the nitty-gritties of business, etc. But if you look at it, I'll just give you an example. That if you think of, if any one of you here works for a corporate or any other kind of company, if you think of changing your products and services, if you think you're working on one product and then tomorrow the company thinks that no, let's go for some other product, how long would it ideally take to switch from one IT based product to another IT based product or service? How long would it take? Can you suggest? Because it can vary, ranging from 6 months to a few years, right? Every industry has a different way. and ultimately it's based on the complexity of the product or the services that you are going to provide. So there is no option, there is no flexibility as far as switching from one product or service to other product or service within an organized sector. Do not find a lot of flexibility. But if you look at the unorganized sector, think of people who were right now selling Indian flags on 15th August. Around Diwali, they'll be selling your crackers, diyas, etc. Then towards your Christmas and New Year's, they'll be selling different products. Then it'll be your time for Holi. Then they will be sending your selling colors, etc. Right? So within an year, they will switch various businesses. And with that, they would have to change everything. Their supplier gets changed because now previously they were looking for crackers, now they're looking for colors. The person who's going to bring those things, or the people who are involved in logistics, will also change. So the entire supply chain changes, your targeted customer changes. Then you might have to change your location, right? You are selling at this corner. You find that most of the people living in this area are actually, say, most of them are from a different religion. And these items would not be in demand in that area. Then you would have to change your setup. So all those things would have to be changed. And they'll do it 5 to 6 times a year. Why? Because they believe in putting in efforts, because they know it is not just a matter of making profit. It is a matter of livelihood. It is a matter of getting food on their plates. It is a matter of sending their children in school, getting healthcare facilities available for their family. So they, if you look at the unorganized sector as well, they would be ready to put in more efforts. So it's not that we have to just limit our ideas about entrepreneurship to your organized sector or to your big startups, big companies. You can think small and you can think better, right? So all these suggestions that you have related to this can be incorporated here, because you will have diverse opinions, because someone coming from a different industry will think in a different manner. And also this part is covered thoroughly in your economy paper. Okay, so seasonal business, yes. Yes, so Santosh is suggesting about the skill development, various skill development courses that we have, there should be a tracking mechanism. So the way I was saying that once the skill development program is over, the company or the government do not care whether those people got employed or not, whether the job that they got has actually, or the employer has actually retained them or not. So there has to be a continuous tracking mechanism. So the way we have assessments in our schools, there should be assessments when it comes to skill development as well. But you'll find Santosh now that for every kind of skill that you are actually learning, you have certifications, both in government and your private sector. So they make you go through an assessment, take up an assessment and assess your skills. Basis that, they give you a certificate, but ultimately there should be hand holding when it comes to placements. So rather than just imparting skills, help them with placement as well. Right? So you have all these kinds of examples related to skill development. Then you think of your role of technology in skilling, because yes, you would say that if it comes to industrial skills, you cannot use technology. The way we were saying that online education will become ineffective because people would not get experience of, say, working with their hands, or they will not get experience of the practical understanding or the practical work. But at least there are few skills which can be imparted through technology. Think of your soft skills, think of your English speaking skills, think of your interpersonal skills, the way you conduct yourself. Think of your various interview programs, right? Those at least can be conducted online. Think of various courses like something related to coding. At least though for those kind of programs, we can use the role of ICT. Then on-job training and upskilling. So why just limit skilling to getting a job? Once you are in that job, there should be a continuous upskilling. So if you look at the corporates, the multinational companies, you'll find they have an allowance, they have their dedicated portals for the employees to get themselves upskilled. So you can take up, if you say work in the field of project management, if you work in the field of say software development, they'll have multiple courses on their dashboard which you can access for free to upskill yourself, so that tomorrow if you want to transition into a different role or to a more advanced role, you can. And if the companies do not have a dedicated portal, what they'll do is they will say earmark some amount in reimbursements. So if you take a course, if you buy a course, you can get it reimbursed, because ultimately they understand that if the employee is skilled, if the employee is motivated to learn, ultimately that employee will help the company to grow, will help the organization to grow, will help the colleagues, will help the entire project. So there has to be on-job training and upskilling as well. And this is also, you find, because I keep giving examples from corporate. Why? Because most of the suggestions that you find here will actually come from their practices, because in terms of professionalism, in terms of professional expertise, they are far better. Then counseling and guidance have emerged as the biggest challenge. So counseling and guidance, starting right from your education system and through your career advancement, because you find that yes, in colleges you do have placement cells. There you'll find, say, people who have previously worked in the industry, but their role is very limited. They come from a particular industry. You generally have just one training and placement officer who can help, but ultimately they do not know about the diverse diverse roles that you can take up. They do not know about your expertise. So there should be more people, more engagement on that level. Then there should be dedicated portals, helplines, mentorship programs when it comes to career advancement at a later stage as well, so that people know, so that people can make an informed choice when it comes to skill development. Now, these were all the ideas about skill development. What are the problems? What can be the suggestions? Any new suggestions can be mentioned here. They are very well welcomed, because you do find many suggestions, newer things coming up on a regular basis in your newspapers. So if you find something interesting, if you find something new, you can keep adding it here. Now just look at this question. Please go through this question. So young people are a major human resource for development, key agents of social change, and the driving force of economic development and technological innovation. In this context, discuss the challenges that India is facing in utilizing the youth bulge. Now, it is a fairly simple question, but you have to make it multidimensional. Just remember, when they are talking in the first statement, in the first part of the statement, they're talking about young people, how they are a major human resource for development. So you have to think of young people and development, then how they can be key agents of social change, and then you also have to think about how they can contribute to economic development and technological innovation. So introduction can be simple. In your introduction, you can just highlight how young people can actually be beneficial in all these dimensions, how they can become key agents of social change, how can they become driving forces of economic development and technological innovation. Right. So introduction can be simple, wherein you just highlight the how of the first statement. Right. Then coming to your body part, you have to primarily talk about the challenges that India is facing in utilizing this youth bulge. All the challenges that we have mentioned are actually more than sufficient, but if you want to write more, yes, you can. So all the challenges that we have mentioned there, that how these challenges can are actually coming in the way of India using this or utilizing this youth bulge. Then in your conclusion part, you can just quickly talk about a few suggestions to fix this issue, right? Apart from this, any other structure that you can possibly think of. So your body and conclusion remains the same, right? Because if your body is full of challenges, then you have to conclude with suggestions. That remains the same. What about introduction? So what I have suggested is that you portray how these young people are a major human resource for development, key agents of social change, and driving force of economic development and technological innovation. So that is my idea. Okay, other ideas, please. Anushka is saying today's youth is distracted, they're confused what to do. Absolutely, yes. That's why we are talking about the role of mentoring throughout your career, right? The role of mentoring, taking views of the experts. Okay, what else? So challenges can be related to policy about economic initiatives, employability, traditional mindset, gender biasness, skills, etc. So all these issues, dimensions that have been highlighted previously. Role of youth in various fields. It's better we stick to this. So either we think of youth and how they can lead to development, or maybe something else. Maybe something else. Let's not talk about role of youth in various fields. So Santosh, yes, suggestions can be anything coming from your current affairs. These suggestions can be something that we have already discussed. So yes, one idea is great. Okay, so I missed who mentioned that. One idea is thinking of how this youth bulge can be converted into demographic dividend. That's what primarily the first statement is, but the first statement limits your answer to, or your perspective to, a few dimensions, but you can give an overall idea that what are the challenges related to this youth bulge, that these are not skilled, and if we skill them, we can ultimately reap demographic dividend. So yes, any positive way in which youth bulge can be utilized, that is the same idea, Vaishnav. Okay, great. So fairly simple question. Fairly simple question. Let's limit it to your young population, to youth bulge, and to your demographic dividend. Then in body part, you highlight the challenges, and in conclusion, you come up with suggestions to these problems, right? Okay, yes, Anurag, we are talking about various technological innovations, right? Yes, you can highlight those. You can definitely highlight those. So yes, Onkar, when we are talking about skill development, it has to start from your education system, right? So you can definitely write the issues related to education system and skill development. So we were saying that our education system is not actually in the direction of skilling people to take up work later, is not creating employable people, right? So it definitely starts from there. Okay, so baby has asked a question: is there any kind of jobs for 12th pass? Now you see, if you think about this, baby, we are saying that your gross enrollment ratio in higher education is close to 27%. That means 27% of these people who have, or these students who have passed 12th standard, are going to higher education. So these 27% go to higher education. What about the rest 70%? Ultimately, yes, there'll be a few who would not work for life. That is fine. But ultimately, these people would go and work somewhere. So your industries, particularly your MSMEs, will absorb these people. Then even your service sector, your gig economy will also absorb a lot of these students, right? A few of these will take up agriculture. A few of these will get involved in any kind of unorganized sector activity. So yes, they do work, right? It's not that if they are not enrolled in higher education, they're not working at all. So Shivani has given another suggestion for the previous question, which says youth needs to develop the attitude of learning new things and utilizing it. Absolutely, yes. That is what leads to innovation. Now, if you remember, now we are moving towards the end of our your towards the last couple of chapters of your social justice. And starting from social issues, we have seen that India, being a diverse country, we have different issues, we have different benefits arising out of that diversity. Now, in that diversity, if you think of your socio-economically backward classes, right, and the other sections of the society, there is a huge gap. There are people who are lagging behind in every aspect of life. So generally, you can relate those people to poor. You can relate those people on the basis of your backward castes, etc. So yes, there are certain sections in our society who are lagging behind, be it women, be it your transgenders, be it your SCs, STs, be it your economically weaker sections, right? So all these people are lagging behind. Now we have seen that the government is making a lot of initiatives, is taking a lot of initiatives, is working in this direction, but the problem still remains. So you have found questions on that as in the previous year, and we have discussed a lot of things. So it is primarily government working in that direction. That is what we have understood. But at the same time, I was saying that you also think of the role of civil society. That why do we have to rely on government for each and everything? If these people who are weak, if these people who are lagging behind in the process of development, why can't the society help them come out of that problem? Why can't the society help them enter the mainstream? So these people who are powerless, these people can be socially, economically, politically powerless. We have to empower these people. We have to bring these people at the center stage of development. So they also reap benefits out of the economic development that is happening around us. And how do we do it? So yes, government can take various initiatives. But also, if you remember, we were saying that while taking up those initiatives, you have to take a balanced stand. So just think about this. If you want to provide better healthcare to people, which will ultimately help them in all the aspects of life, it'll help them with ultimately their well-being. So we were saying the government is talking about a push towards privatization, but at the same time, they're talking about increasing government expenditure as well. So they're always taking a balanced stand. Because a few of us might think that is it that the priorities of the government are completely misplaced? Is it that the priorities of the government and the society at large are completely misplaced? That we are not taking care of our weaker sections? So you have to remember that always and always you have to take a balanced stand, right? If you look at your policies, if you look at your programs, they always make incremental changes. They always try to make incremental changes, but you'll definitely find a few instances where they make abrupt changes, and yes, those policies at times fail as well. Why should we not make these abrupt changes? Why should it always has to be incremental? The idea is that we do not have to give people a cultural shock, right? If you think about, say, the idea of reservation, what I was saying was that rather than disputing it on mere facts, on other things, just dispute the idea that even though we have this policy for reservation to the backward classes prevalent for the past few years, for the past 70 years or so, why do we think, why is it that a lot of even though a lot of efforts have gone into it, why is it that we are not able to uplift those people? Why is it that we are not able to bring changes in their lives, right? So the idea is just look at the efficacy of that policy, efficiency of that policy, whether it is effective or not, rather than disputing it altogether that no, it should not be there or it should be there. Just think about the basic problem that is there. And also we make incremental changes so that we ultimately not upset the entire balance, right? If you think of complete privatization, for example, because these things will range from each and every from say a policy of reservation to other policies, for the policies for PPP, etc. So any kind of change which has to be made is to be incremental in nature. We do not want to upset the social balance. Just think about this. If we go towards a complete push towards privatization, if we say that let's privatize everything, it will have adverse impact. Why? Because now you would not have government to counterbalance. Where would the people, if you completely go by the market norms, because that's what we most of us think, right? That's what most of us think is right, that if we completely go by the market norms, that let market decide what has to be done, let market decide what value a product will have, let market decide what are we going to value more, what happens to our weaker sections, the ones who are already left behind? It will be detrimental to their existence, right? So when you think of changes, you always think of incremental changes. And also, apart from the role of government, you also think of the role of society, and this is the direction in which we are moving. So now we are going to think about the role of society in this process of development. It is not just government which has to take care of all the development part. We as people, we are also responsible for the betterment of our society, for the betterment of our fellow citizens. So we have to think of the role of civil society. Before we come to civil society, just go through this. We find that if you look at Indian society, it is very diverse. There is widespread inequality in our society. So first we have to find out which are the areas which need to be addressed, which is contemplated very well in our various policies and programs of the government. Because ultimately, when you look at the policy making process, parliament is the last stage where they actually get approved, right, where they get politically legitimized. But a lot of efforts go into creating these policies in the back end, that you have to go through a lot of data analysis, you have to evaluate your previous policies, your older policies, etc. So do not just think of your policies as political tools. Yes, they can be used as political tools, but a lot of comprehension goes behind creating those policies. So they know very well which areas need to be addressed. Just think of your multidimensional poverty index. So for the first time, we have seen such a huge drop in multidimensional poor in our country. Why? Because of the targeted policies and programs. So we have to think which areas need to be addressed. But yes, there still can be areas which are left unaddressed. For that matter, who can help? We as people can come together and make our voice reach your government, the state, that this is something which also has a certain sense of importance, significance attached to it, and it should be taken up. Then all these objectives, all these policies, or all these acts that the government is going to do or the civil society is going to take up have to be incremental in nature, so that we do not upset the balance of the society. So if you think of removing the policy of reservation altogether, saying that everyone is equal, now everyone has to compete, what will happen? It will lead to a protest, a movement. It can lead to anything, right? It can become problematic for us. It can become an internal security issue. So all these changes have to be, you have to always think of striking the right balance so that you do not upset the existing setup of the society, right? So please remember this. This is how we have to approach the idea of development. It should have ideally been covered previously before we started with social justice. But you see that wherever we were having this discussion, we were trying to create that balance. Even you students during the process understood how to have reached that balance. And that balance, it is now, I'm not just limiting this idea to the idea of social justice. What I'm saying is, once you become civil servants, and I hope so that most of you find your names on the list, So once you become civil servants, there also you would have to have that balance, right? When you read ethics, you talk about emotional intelligence. When you think of various kind of ethical case studies that you find in your examination, you see that you cannot take an outright stand. You always have to create a balance. So this understanding of all the issues, all the social issues that we have already gone through, because now we do not have any social issues as such which are left, right? Now we are trying to address those problems. We are trying to address those problems through the intervention of the government. Now we are trying to address those problems through the intervention of civil society. So the way we were talking about the problem of, say, urbanization, we were looking at various suggestions, and now with increased emphasis towards government policies, you find that you have more points to write there. You have more ways to address that problem. Similarly, the idea of regionalism, right? So in the chapter on regionalism, you would not have, say, realized that, okay, we can connect it to skill development. But here you see that if you develop locally relevant skills, you can actually help those people get employed there. And ultimately, there would not be, we would not find those regional imbalances anymore, because every state would then start growing at the same kind of rate. Not exactly same, but yes, similarly. So let's just keep these ideas in mind, because now we are moving more towards the role of civil society in the process of development and empowerment, and also the role of, and also how the policies that we have discussed, how the programs that we have discussed, how are they formulated, what can be the problems related to their design, what can be the problems related to their implementation, etc. So the first part of our discussion is going to be centered around civil society, the role of civil society. Now you do not find this mentioned in your examination, in your syllabus. Rather, you find your development, industry and processes mentioned there. But if you look at it, once you understand the idea of civil society, you'll find your NGOs, you'll find your SHGs, you'll find your various other organizations simpler to understand, right? So let's first look at the idea of civil society. Now, when you think of civil society, just think of people. So yes, government is playing its role, but a few people come together and they find that there are other problems. They think of a particular problem. They're saying, yes, the government is doing its best, but still we find a lot of environmental issues in our region, or maybe in the country as a whole, or maybe on international level. So we find that there is something that needs to be done about this problem of environment, this problem of pollution. So what they'll do is, they'll come together, they start deliberating the issue. With that deliberation will come various suggestions, various solutions to that problem. So they might think that it is because people are not aware that they leave the electricity on, or they leave their switches, their lights, their fans on when they leave their rooms or when they leave their workplace. So why not make people more aware, so that the burden on resources goes down, and ultimately the levels of pollution and the carbon footprint goes down. So they come together voluntary. They have already thought of an objective which they have to achieve. They know that they have to work in the direction of curbing environmental pollution. They have to decrease the burden on resources. For that, they will think of various ways and they'll start working on those. But ultimately, the idea is that they are working on these issues voluntarily. They're working on these issues for the matter of public service. They want to serve the people. They do not want to derive any kind of profit out of it. That is what the idea of civil society is. We will look into the various features of civil society. Just think of various examples. Think of your various social movements. Just think of your farmer movement that we saw in the past 2 years. So you'll find that government came out with 3 farm bills, and the farmer community, with the help of other experts, they contemplated those farm bills and they thought that no, this is something that will work to our detriment. This is something which is actually not going to help us double our income. This is something that will actually make us lose our lands. So they came together, they had the objective in mind that, okay, we have to pressurize the government, or we have to connect with the government to either take these farm bills back, or to make these amendments. So they came together voluntarily. The idea was to either help this section of the people, so it can be limited to that particular section, or it can be for larger public service, right? So they came together voluntarily on their own accord. They're not forced by anyone, they were not coerced by anyone. They are not thinking of any kind of profit attached to this movement. They just want to get their issues addressed by the government. Why? Because the government did not consult the stakeholders. So they come together, they try to pressurize the government, and they get the work done, and the movement is called off. What is this? Example of a civil society. Similarly, think of the NGO of Pratham, right? We have already looked into the education sector, and there we talked about ACER report for school education. What is that? A group of people who have came together voluntarily, who want to improve the quality of education for children, who want to improve the access of children to education, who want to highlight these issues so that government can address those issues. So they come together, they form an organization, they form this NGO, non-governmental organization, and they start working in that direction. The objective is to make the quality of education better, to help government implement right to education better. And they start working on it. Is the motive any kind of profit? No. It is only public service. It is only helping students or helping children with their education. So the purpose or the demand is not, or the motive is not, say, selfish. Rather, it is altruistic. It is meant to help others rather than being a personal selfish motive. So if you think of various kinds of examples, yes, you're right in that sense that you're talking about Chipko movement. So any kind of socio-political movement can be considered a civil society. Your wrestler movement, absolutely yes. Think of your NGOs, think of your self-help groups, think of your cooperative societies, think of your various philanthropic organizations. What are these? Examples of civil society. Now, another question. Okay, yes. So, yes, the way the ideas that you are suggesting is right. Yes. So, yes, Santosh, will come to the problems related to NGOs and governments, etc. Now, just think about this. What can be the various features of civil society? Let's come to that. Then you start thinking of the role of civil societies. What kind of roles the civil society can play? So the first idea is that the civil society is voluntary, that people are coming out of their own free will, of their own choice, without any kind of compulsion. They have not been coerced to gather. They have not been coerced to come together and form organization or join hands with other people. They're doing this voluntarily. Now, these are people with similar interests. Why? Because these people with similar interests will actually have a similar objective. Either that objective can be to help a certain section of the population, or it can be for some general or common good, right? So the ultimate idea is public service. It is not their selfish motive. Then they are not for profit. Why? They do not care about profit, whether they'll make any kind of profit in this organization or not. The only idea is public service. That is how they're different from any other. So if you think of your companies, they are also organizations which are not dependent on government, or which are independent of government, which are autonomous, but their motive is profit. That's how they're different. And we will come to the differences between companies and cooperative societies, which has actually already been discussed in your economy lectures, but I'll still give you an overview. Now, these civil society or these organizations of people are independent of the government. Now, being independent of the government means when it comes to their functioning, but they can be dependent on government for various other things. That also will be addressed with your NGOs. Now, these become the bridge between the state and the citizens. So if the state, they can be working with the best motive for public service, but they can still miss upon various aspects. They might have, say, forgotten about the remote areas. They might not be able to, say, connect with people living in some other area, or people who speak a different language for that matter, right? If you think of tribals, if you think of tribal population, you find that there is a lot of, say, communication gap between the state and the tribals. So these civil society organizations can become a bridge between the state and the government. So they are working for public service. They can become a bridge between this, between the state and citizens. So that one idea is, so that the citizens get to tell the government what their demands are, and also it can help the government. It can help the government understand the needs of the citizen. It can be either way around. So either citizens can make their voice reach the government, or otherwise, or alternatively, the government can make their voice reach citizens through these civil society organizations. Now, these can be organized on a regional, national, or international level, that you'll also understand. So at a regional level, there can be people who can come together and work in the direction of cleanliness on a very local level, within a district or maybe within a village. Then these can be international organizations. You have various international NGOs that are working in India. Think of Save the Children, for that matter. Then it can be organized on a national level. For example, your Pratham is working on a national level in the field of education. So these can be organized on any level. But remember, the idea is never profit. The objective is never to make profit, but the objective is to serve the people. The objective is to work in the direction of common good. The objective is to empower people who are powerless, empower people who come or who belong to the weaker sections. So when you look at SHGs, when you look at cooperative societies, do not think that how is it related to public service, because these can also fulfill demands of a certain section, right? Okay, Santosh, will come to your ideas. Do not worry, we'll come to your ideas. Now, why do we need this civil society? So it basically comes from the significance itself. We see that in India, we have a representative kind of democracy. Means what? That people, they elect their representatives who ultimately discuss, debate, deliberate amongst themselves, finalize the policies and implement those. So yes, indirectly, it is the will of the people which they reflect. But at the same time, what can happen is, in a country of scale of India, because geographically, in terms of demography, in terms of diversity, we are on the top when it comes to the entire world. Various countries, if we compare, we find that in terms of diversity, in terms of population, etc., India is huge. India is massive. So it can happen so that these representatives, either deliberately or maybe they're not aware of the issues of certain sections of the society. So rather than keeping it as a representative democracy, civil society organization will help mobilize these people, will help mobilize the citizens, so that they also become a part of this democratic setup. They also come up with their suggestions. They also come up with their demands. They also come up with their will, their intent to hold the government responsible. So the responsibility of your cabinet would not be just limited to parliament. They'll be responsible directly to people. How? Because they are going to convert into participative democracy. Now people are also coming up. Your farmers, your wrestlers will also come up with their demands. Will say that this is a problem that the government is not addressing, and they will say, have rallies, they will have various kinds of protests to make their voice reach the government, to hold the government accountable, to hold the government responsible, thereby converting this representative democracy into participative democracy. Also, one idea is to hold the government responsible. Another idea is to mobilize people, making people a part of their own development process, right? So people in getting people to work for cleanliness, getting people to work for their own health, getting people to work for their own education and skilling, right? Making people a part of this process of development. Then also you'll find that at times the government can become authoritarian. They would know that this particular section of the society is suffering. This is the problem. But they'll say that we are not going to take care of you. Why? Because now we are in power and we will take care of only those people who actually elected us to government, who elected us to power. And we are not going to look at you. We are not going to help this section. So what option do they have? They have to come together. They have to come together, use this power of organization to counter the government. You think of your various movements, and generally what happens is whenever it comes to holding the government accountable, it takes a political turn. So just remember this: whenever you think of whenever you think of civil society, you think of it as non-political, because they should not have any kind of political bias. Ultimately, they are meant for public service. But yes, it is natural. It is natural that people and various organizations would have one or the other political ideology. They might be working in a certain direction, right? So yes, there can be, say, there can be elements of politicization in these organizations, but they should not be overtly political for that matter. So when you think of civil society organizations trying to hold government responsible, you can think of your movement for right to information, right, to enhance transparency in the system. Then you can think of your anti-corruption movement. Then you can think of various other political movements which were there to hold the government responsible. To bridge this gap between the government and the citizens, to stop the government from becoming authoritarian, we need these civil society organizations, which basically prepares the ground or prepares the background to understand the role of civil society. So you are saying that your civil society is helping people get their rights. Your civil society is helping spread awareness among people. Your civil society is helping convert this representative democracy into participative democracy. This civil society is helping our government become more responsible, become more transparent. This civil society is helping weaker sections assert their demands. This civil society is helping these weaker sections or various sections of people to empower themselves. And this basically is the role of civil society. Now, various organizations, various forms of civil society will have different roles. Let's just go through them one by one, and we will just go through them briefly, because you have understood all these roles. And what I've done is I've mentioned the examples for pretty much every role of civil society that is mentioned here. So their role of policy advocacy. So helping children with their rights, the right to education, or helping a certain section enforce their rights, assert their rights. Similarly, they can help people or people coming from a certain section from others or from the government infringing their rights. So think of various movements of tribals. Think of various tribal movements. Wherever the government becomes more authoritarian, for that matter, these civil society organizations will take up the role of protection. They will try to protect, they'll try to shield these weaker sections from the tyranny of the state or the tyranny of the society at large. Then they can help mobilize citizens and resources, right? So making citizens come together, work in the direction of cleanliness, making citizens come together, work in the direction of environment, work in the direction of women empowerment. They can also help them mobilize resources, because ultimately these people who are working voluntarily, these people who include you and me, where do the resources come from? We are the ones who will pool resources. We think that yes, it is time for winters, right? It is about winters, and there are a lot of our elderly out on the roads. There are a lot of homeless out on the roads. Let's pool some resources out of our own pocket and let's distribute something. Let's distribute a blanket so that they can get rid of cold, so that they do not become, say, vulnerable, or they do not fall sick. So what are we doing? We are basically mobilizing resources, pooling our resources to help them. Now these roles are also going to become a problem. Now the civil society becomes an active partner in development. Just think of the Acer report. Now, don't you think the Acer report would have contributed a lot to our national education policy? Not the Acer report 22, but the Acer report that has been coming out pretty much every year. Yes, it does. Similarly, there are other NGOs. Remember your Global Hunger Report, Global Hunger Index. These are also brought about by your non-governmental organizations. So yes, if the government wants to learn from there, it can help them. Then also they help government reach the areas where they are not currently present. Just think of your remote areas. They think of your tribal areas. There it is ultimately with the help of civil society that the government is able to reach those people. Then they can help in promotion of transparency and accountability. Think of your RTI Act, the movements that were there. Then they can become service providers. So they can either help government in providing services, or they can themselves provide services to people who are actually untouched by development. They can take up the role of educating and making people aware. But now with all this, you find there are various issues, various challenges. Now we are saying that these people are coming voluntarily. They are pooling their own resources, right? They do not have resources. They do not have money. So for money, either they have to say stick to their own pockets if they have the resources, else they have to look up to someone else to help them with the financing part of it, right? For everything you need money, but they would not have adequate financial resources. At times they will seek government's help. But if you think about this, if they take government's help, what happens to their autonomy? If they take the help of, or if they take these finances from an international organization, what happens to their autonomy? Don't you think the government or these international organizations tomorrow would say that if you do not work according to our will, we are going to stop your funding? If these civil society organizations tomorrow try to pressurize government, don't you think the government would say, please, do not, else we'll stop your funding and everything will fall apart? So this lack of financial resources become a problem. Now we are saying it is common people, it is you and me who gather or who get organized together and start working in this direction. Do we all have professional expertise? Do we all have those skills to make things work? Not really. So the training of the human resources, training of these people who are involved in these works becomes a problem. Also, if you think about these organizations, these are autonomous, these are working independently. Now they might be taking resources from people. So for example, this is an organization of 5 people, say, and one person who is more skilled, one person who is more aware or who is sharper, they say become the unsaid leader of this organization. Now this organization, all these 5 people are getting resources from the community. They say, they go to the community, they say that ultimately we are going to help you in keeping your environment clean. Why don't you give us, provide us with resources so that we can help you do that, right? It is ultimately for your own benefit. And the community, they start pushing in resources. Now these organizations which work independent of the government, these organizations that are working on a very basic regional level, do you think they will maintain transparency in the system, that how those funds are going to be utilized? So one, they do not have adequate financial resources. Second is, once they get these resources, they do not work transparently. They might be getting funds from some international organization. Now that international organization might be linked to some terrorist organization who can become an internal security threat in our country. Also, you find that wherever there is this interface between the civil society organizations and government, it becomes a problem. The moment these civil society organizations start interfering in the business of the state would say, please keep away. The state would say, we'll stop your funding. The state would say, the funding you are getting from the foreign organizations will be stopped. We will ban you. So whenever there is this interface between these, as long as these civil society organizations are helping the government, it is fine. But once they start getting in the way of government, once they start getting in the start pressurizing government for something, it becomes a problem. Just think of how many farmers would have lost their lives during the farmer protest. Now, it was not merely out of cold. Think of what happens during these political movements, the steps that the governments take. Just think of the NGOs and the civil society organizations who try to pressurize the government. So whenever there is going to be an interface between the state and the civil society, as long as it is in the favor of government, it is fine. But once they start challenging the government, once they start questioning the government, they would have to backstab. So yes, there can be issues related to their autonomy. There can be issues related to transparency and accountability in their functioning. There can be issues related to the competency, the skills of the professionals or the volunteers who are involved in this work. Now, what we'll do is we will look at a few types of civil society organizations. I'm not saying that we are going to cover all the civil society organizations, but the basic idea is once you have understood the framework of civil society organizations, it'll be easier. It'll be easier to understand each and every kind. So we will take up a few important kinds of civil society organizations and look at their organization, look at various features, look at the issues, and then we will come up with suggestions. Right now, we're not coming up with suggestions which are easy, right? If they're not transparent and accountable, regulate them properly. Just check whether they are funded properly or not. Check whether they are able to function independently or not, right? So all these suggestions we are going to include when we look at these specific forms of civil society organizations. Let's look at your questions and then we will take a short break and we will start discussing your non-governmental organizations after the break. So yes, your RACER report was quoted in the budget. Yes, the government takes help from these organizations, right? So an NGO in Gujarat has made tremendous work to help government control the population of street dogs, etc. Okay, great. So yes, sometimes civil societies can become a challenge or become a barrier in the process of national development, right? It can become an internal security threat, etc. So let's do one thing. After the break, we will start discussing these various forms of civil society organizations. We'll try to conclude these civil society organizations today. We'll look at a few questions related to these as in the past and a couple of practice questions. And then tomorrow we will start with the next part of our discussion that is related to evaluation of policies, that is related to design and implementation of policies. So let's take a break and meet again at 7:05 after the break. Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So let's start with our discussion on first type of our civil society organizations, which are NGOs, non-governmental organizations. Now, you find various examples of NGOs in our country. You have NGOs working in the field of health, working in the field of environmental protection, working in the field of education, etc. Now, what are these NGOs? And also, if you look at the numbers of NGOs, you find that your CSI reports India having close to 33 lakh NGOs. But if you look at your NGO Darpan, which is basically a portal for the NGOs, where the NGOs have to register for any kind of government funding, it keeps the number to around 1.6 lakhs. But the idea is that not all NGOs are dependent on government funding. Not all NGOs are, they register with the government. So these NGOs are legally constituted organizations. That means primarily when we think of the idea of NGOs, they are registered with the government under 3 acts. These 3 acts are Societies Registration Act, trusts, and they can also register as charitable companies under your Companies Act. These NGOs operate independently of the government. Now, when we say independently, they might be dependent on the government for their funding, but when it comes to their administration, when it comes to their operations, they are independent of the government. So they cannot be considered as equivalents of government. Now, these are non-state. That means they are not run by state. They're not formed by state. These are non-profit oriented groups. As the basic idea of civil society organizations goes, that they are not for profit. They're not oriented towards profit. Their basic objective is to take care of public interest. Right now, this public interest can be limited to a certain section, or this public interest can be something that affects all. These are funded either totally or partially by the government. Now, they can shell out their own resources. They can pool their own resources to carry out their operations. Because if you want to work in any direction, if you want to, say, provide books to children coming from weaker sections, you would need money. If you want to carry out any kind of services or to provide any kind of services to the citizens, you need money. For their day-to-day operations, they also need money. Now, this money can come out of their own pockets. They can be funded by the government, or they can be funded by other organizations as well. Also, you find that companies, as part of their corporate social responsibility, they also provide resources to these NGOs. They generally are involved in grassroots level operations. Now, the idea is that most of the volunteers who become part of these NGOs are actually the ones who are working on ground. They'll be from various places. Just think of any kind of NGO. Think of NGOs working in the direction of education. Think of Pratham for that matter. So they have various study centers. They have various centers in your in the areas where most of the weaker sections reside. For example, your slum areas, they have a lot of centers in rural areas. Now, those people who are actually part of it, they will come from that area. They will come from that region. They are working on the grassroots level. So they are not, primarily making any policy level changes. Yes, they can influence the policy, but ultimately they are the ones who work on ground. These are what called NGOs. But also think about the organization of people which might not be registered with the government. So you students might be, say, for example, college students can come together, form an organization, come together voluntarily and start working in the field of protecting rights of children, protecting rights of students. They can also be called NGOs, but not say the technical definition. They would not fall under the technical definition of NGOs because they are not registered, but they also work as non-governmental organizations. Now you can find various types of NGOs. You have international NGOs. For example, Save the Children, which is an international NGO. For example, you have NGOs like Greenpeace, international organizations. Then you can also have see the NGOs which work as activists, right? So if you look at the definition or the categories of NGOs as highlighted by your World Bank, they talk about either operational NGOs which work in helping the government with design and the implementation of various development projects. Then also there can be other advocacy NGOs which influence, which make people aware about their rights, which help people assert their rights, which help people influence government policies. So there can be advocacy NGOs. Now do not get confused between advocacy and activist NGOs. The basic idea is when it comes to activist NGOs, they are basically acting. They are taking up action in the field of these policies. So there can be NGOs who would just mobilize people to influence government policies. There can also be NGOs. There can also be NGOs who will start working, who will start acting on those things. So yes, they might not be the only ones which take up protests, right? The NGOs might not be the only ones which go for protests. These NGOs can otherwise work with the government as well. So, for example, the examples that you are giving from Jaipur, from Gujarat, just think of those NGOs. Are they protesting against the government? No, they are helping the government. They are helping the government, or they are say raising the concerns of a particular section, right? Now these NGOs can be helpful to both government and to the people. For example, to the government, they can become parts of the implementation. So government wants to implement a program in your remote areas. Now the government might not have sufficient administrative force, might not have sufficient human resources. So they will take help of these NGOs in implementing those programs. Now government definitely takes help from these NGOs in policy formulation. Just think about your ACER report and your national education policy. Think about your health policy and various NGOs working in that. Think about policy for transgenders and various NGOs working in that direction. So they are helping the government to broaden the scope of development, to make the development projects, the development programs more inclusive. They provide government flexibility because now the government can take up any other work. Now the government has the freedom to invest the resources elsewhere because this dimension or this particular program or project can be taken up by those NGOs. Now these NGOs are the ones working at the grassroots level. So you find that these NGOs will have better reach compared to the government. Just think of your remote areas, think of tribal areas, think of your slum areas. It is primarily the NGOs with the help of which government implements its projects and programs. Now these NGOs will have various people, various volunteers who are working in this direction. They'll have expertise in that particular area, in that particular field. So government gets expert opinions from them. Because government might not have a dedicated department for the same. Government might not have skilled people working in that field. So these NGOs or the people who are working there will help government with their expertise. They understand the local problems and the challenges better than the government because they are the ones working there. So they can instruct, they can suggest governments with solutions. That okay, this is the problem. They can highlight the problem and they can suggest solutions to the same because these NGOs might not have resources. These NGOs might need government help. Then also they help the government in conducting a meaningful dialogue with the citizens. So at times you'll find that there is a trust deficit between the government and the people and the citizens. It might be so that the government is not at all aware of the needs, of the specific needs and demands of the people. So these NGOs will help government, or the NGOs will provide government interface between the citizens and government. At the same time, they are helping citizens to hold the government accountable, ultimately increasing the transparency and accountability and leading to good governance. They can help people mobilize, they can help people organize themselves to take up any kind of constructive work. They can help people in building capacity. They can skill people, right? So you will find NGOs working, for example, just take example of NGOs and self-help groups who were there, which of which you'll find example, and I'll share in the future. So we find that those NGOs helped women develop skills. Those NGOs helped various self-help groups of women take up this task of manufacturing your masks during COVID. Now it is helpful to the government because they are helping with the supply of these masks that were required at that point of time, and which we had a shortage. And then also they're helping those self-help groups, they're helping those women to get to empower themselves, right? So empower themselves economically and ultimately socially and politically as well. They help these citizens to facilitate any kind of service delivery. So it can be related to your skills, it can be say your legal services that they provide, right? So they provide legal services to people who cannot afford these legal proceedings, because legal proceedings at times can have a lot of cost, right? So these groups of lawyers who form an NGO, and they start helping people coming from weaker sections, and hence making this legal process or making these legal services affordable and accessible to people. Then it is an effective non-political link between people and the government. Just think about this. If you think of the relationship between government and people, mostly it is either of citizens and service providers, the government providing services to citizens. It can be as a matter of representation, but it can have an political overtone. It can have a political overtone. So these NGOs can act as neutral agents. But with this, as you already are, say, suggesting, there can be various problems, various issues related to these NGOs. So at times, they might not have sufficient resources because they are dependent on their financial resources, either on people or the government or any other organization. So the funding, the financial aspect can become a problem. Then the volunteers who are working might not be professional. They might not have skills. Then the NGO in itself, within its structure, might be facing issues related to transparency and accountability. Then these NGOs, if they are funded by any kind of unsocial, anti-national elements, they can lead to an internal security issue in the future. Similarly, whenever there is an interface between, when you look at the negative interface between NGOs and government, you might find that the government goes on banning these NGOs on various grounds, right? They can say that you're not being transparent in your operations. Your sources of funding have not been declared properly. You're working towards anti-national activities. So the government, civil society, or rather NGO interface can become a problem. Now you'll find you have various small NGOs. Yes, so the idea of FCRA. Okay, so let's come back to funding once. So these NGOs can get funded by international organizations, international contributors. To regulate that, the government has your Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, under which you have various provisions which you can go through here. Now these, I believe that these have already been discussed in your economy lectures. But to think about this, so the problem can be these foreign contributors might be working for some ulterior motive. might be mobilizing people against the government, might have a negative role to play. Then also, if the government feels without or say without any say without any proper proofs, the government might feel that this NGO is becoming a problem with our image, because this NGO is highlighting issues which shows government in a poor light. So with that, this FCRA, this Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, can be used in a negative sense. And you are given an example of banning a lot of NGOs under the provisions of FCRA. So what you do is, rather than we taking up all the aspects of FCRA, it has been discussed, and also I've provided this link for FCRA, and you can just go through this and you'll find all the provisions of FCRA and the critical analysis in one place, right? So if at all a question is asked from this dimension, you will be able to answer. Coming back, for these limited resources, now these limited resources can be your limited financial resources. These limited resources can be your limited human resources, which can become a problem in their functioning. Also, you'll find there are various small NGOs, and that your Central Statistical Institute puts the number at 33 lakh. So there are various small NGOs working in the same direction, working in the same field, and there is no collaboration amongst them. So which can become a problem. Why? Because they are basically redoing the work that has already been done by someone else, which has already been done by another organization. It can be beneficial in the sense that these smaller NGOs will have better reach. These smaller NGOs will be working on grassroots level. But think of creating an apex organization, an umbrella organization for each and every dimension. So for example, all the NGOs working in the direction of health, nutrition, etc., if they start working together, if they start collaborating together, if they start sharing their resources, pooling their resources, they can actually work better. So which basically is a suggestion. And also, you might think that what happens to the smaller NGOs? Because ultimately, if you think about this, there are various small NGOs who come together, start collaborating. Now they are working under this apex organization, which can basically regulate their functioning, which can suggest that rather than redoing something, let's take up a different task. So the problems related to nutrition are solved. Let's take up the issue related to the communicable diseases that are happening right now. But ultimately, these NGOs stay at the grassroots level. Even with an apex organization, it will not become a problem. It will not become a problem with their reach. So these smaller NGOs do not have any coordination. They do not have any apex organization to organize their work. Then if you think at this, at times they do not work transparently, as already highlighted. So people have gathered their resources, pooled their resources, but they are not working with transparency as to how those resources have been utilized. So the way we talk about issues related to transparency in government, those can be extended to these NGOs as well. Now, if you are relying on someone else for your funding, if you're relying on, say, the government or some foreign institution or people, you'll find that your autonomy, your independence will be curbed, will be something that might become a problem, because then ultimately you would have to heed to what they say, else they will take back their funding. Then it can become an internal security threat, in the sense that there can be NGOs which might be funded by such organizations, which can ultimately lead to various kinds of incidents happening in the country. They can mobilize people against the government. They can mobilize people against a certain section of the society and ultimately become a security threat. Then we have large number of NGOs, but smaller in size, already looked at the problem. Then the idea of xenophobia. Now, xenophobia being wary of or having a sense of fear or having a sense of hatred towards other people, towards say foreign elements, which can also impact their funding, because people might feel even though the NGO might be working for the betterment of people, but if it is funded by some other elements, it is funded by people coming from other country or other community, people might feel that no, it is not for us. It is something that is working against us. So this idea of xenophobia can also impact foreign funding. Then the government acts as a big brother, right? So they will try to get into the way of day-to-day operations of these NGOs. They'll try to tell them that this is what you have to do, this is how you have to do, and not pay due attention to their autonomy, not let them work autonomously. At the same time, you'll find that the government can use these NGOs as contractors to reduce their cost. Rather than believing in the cause, rather than helping these NGOs achieve the objectives, the government might use government might use these NGOs as short-time help, or something that they need in short term to get the work done at a say cheaper cost, because these NGOs are primarily run by volunteers who are not profit oriented. These NGOs themselves are not profit oriented, so they can get the task done way cheaper compared to the resources that the government would have to mobilize. So if the government needs 100 rupees to implement a program in one area, the NGOs might need only say 20 rupees to implement the same. So the government misusing these NGOs. Then also we have an absence of policy framework. So when it comes to funding, we do regulate the foreign funding, but ultimately there is a lack of, because we do not have any kind of policy framework, right? So the way we have policies for everything else, we do not have this. So yes, Abhishek, you're saying that we have this apex body, but we are talking more in terms of umbrella organizations for these NGOs who can help them channelize their resources in a better way. And also, if we do not have a proper policy framework, what can the apex organization do? So yes, sometimes these civil societies or these NGOs can work as a barrier to national development. Absolutely, yes. So that has been highlighted. That has been highlighted in form of your security threat. Okay. Then you think of the way forward. And apart from this, there can be challenges related to the human resources that has already been highlighted, right? So these professionals who are working there might not be skilled enough. What can be the what can be the way forward? How can we make these challenges? How can we make these challenges disappear? So by creating an umbrella organization, rather than banning them altogether, because ultimately those NGOs are working in public for the public good. Yes, there can be NGOs with ulterior motives, but most of them are working for public good. Most of them are voluntary organizations. So rather than banning them altogether and undoing all the work that they have done, undoing all the constructive work, regulate them better. Similarly, you should welcome these or motivate these or incentivize these efficient NGOs, and not just use them to fulfill your short-term goals. Then you should incentivize more and more domestic funding. Now you see that you have NGOs which are working to help people with their expenses for getting any kind of medical treatment, right? You do get those ads everywhere, advertisements everywhere. So why not, the way those organizations are working, why not promote most of our NGOs to get domestic funding? Why not make people more socially accountable so that they contribute to these NGOs? Rather than them relying on foreign investment, rather than them relying on government for their funding, it's better if people contribute to these. So we have to make people more aware and more socially accountable. then we have to limit. We are saying that the government acts as a big brother in every aspect. They start interfering, they start interfering in their day-to-day operations, etc. So we have to limit this bureaucratic interference. Now this bureaucratic interference can also be extended to your funding aspect, that ultimately the NGOs who are looking up to government funding, you find that there can be corrupt officials in your various departments, in particularly your social welfare departments. And you'll find that they might ask for a cut, they might take up corrupt practices for these NGOs, against these NGOs, which will work to detriment of these NGOs. So all the problems that we have highlighted, you can just go through this list. You can just go through this list and you will understand that all these issues that we have highlighted can be taken care of with this way forward. Apart from this, what you have to do is just go through the FCRA Act that I have mentioned here. I've shared the link here. You can just copy this link from the PDF later during revision and go through it so that you understand the provisions. If you do not remember these provisions from economy, just go through them again. Please do mention them here because it was an issue back in the year, but right now it is not being discussed to that extent in current affairs. But yes, it can become important again if such issues arise. So these can be various ways in which we can make the NGOs work better, because ultimately we have all kinds of NGOs. The way we say we have all kinds of people, we have all kinds of bureaucrats, we have all kinds of NGOs as well. So there should be a mechanism to differentiate between the ones which are good and the others which are not good, which are working against the government, which are working against common good. So there should be a better mechanism. Now, before we move on to self-help groups, there is a small announcement. The recordings that were available, previously the recordings were available at any time. But now all these classes, all these live classes that happen today, the recordings would not be available after a week. So if you are going through this live class today, yes, for a week you can download, watch this recording, but after a week it'll go away from the app. And also the older recordings of the videos that were available on the app will also go away after your 28th of August. So if you have anything pending, so there is a possibility you might have missed a class in the past. So if you have missed a class and you have kept that recording so that you can watch it later, just go through it before 28th of August. Now the simple idea is self-discipline, because we find that even though it is one of the most important trait, but we find that because of the availability of recordings, we think that yes, we will watch this tomorrow, we'll watch this day after, but that day never comes. Similarly, if you miss your newspaper one day, you find that the newspaper will be lying on your shelf, on your study table for days. And also, if you look at the live class recordings, the live classes are beneficial as long as you are sitting in the class, because you already have the other recordings, right? Already have the other recorded lectures. So to have this sense of self-discipline among students, we are going with this step. And also we have looked into the data that close to 85% of the students watch recordings, if any, within that week itself. So please be prepared that these recordings would not be available after 28th. No, the PPTs and every other content will be available, only the recordings will not be made available. So all the downloaded videos will also go away after 28th of August. Yes, for all subjects. See, just think about this. Were these recordings available last year? No. If you take up any kind of live classes, are they available to watch later? Again, no. But if you, by any chance, if you miss a recording, if you miss a live class for some health related or any other emergency, these will be available to be watched within a week, right? So let's be more disciplined. Let's take up these classes when they are actually conducted, because mostly you'll find that they'll go on piling up, and we will never get time to watch them. Okay, great. Now, moving on to our next form of civil society, which is your self-help groups. Now, if you look at this image, you can understand that there are these women who are together. Most of these women feel like they're coming from the same neighborhood. Looking at the image, you might feel that they're coming from, say, slightly weaker sections, and they are conducting a form of meeting, right? So the idea, we will come to the idea of self-help groups. See, what I'm saying is, you do have your recorded lectures, the other tablet videos which are available on the app, right? You can definitely watch those videos. It's not that every content is going away. It is only the live classes. Just think about this. What is the purpose of live classes? Don't you think the live classes have to be attended when they are actually going live? So if you ever missed a class in your school or college, was it repeated for you? No. And now you see that compared to your school and colleges, you need more and more discipline here. Because ultimately, it is for your benefit. It is not, say, think of me, it is not going to benefit me in any way if these classes are available or not. The only idea is, just think about this. I go on vouching for writing weekly tests. I go on vouching for writing your answers on a daily basis. But how many of you actually do that? You do not. Why? Because there is no self-discipline. And with our experience, we know that without discipline, without sincerity, without consistency, no one's going anywhere. It is not going to get you anywhere. When it comes to civil services examination, it might be helpful in some other thing, but when it comes to civil services examination, it is one of the most important, say, trait that you need to have. Okay, so please try to understand, it is for your own benefit. It is not going to benefit us in any way. The data remains the same, everything remains the same. It is ultimately meant for you. You still have a flexibility of a week. So if you miss a class today, why not go through it within the week? It'll help you to have the discipline to revise as well. So it'll help you creating your notes, because right now what happens is, okay, let's watch the class, and maybe after a month or so, we will create our notes. We will write down our notes. We will understand whatever is left behind. But now you would have to make sure that within this week, I have to revise. Within this week, I have to clear all my doubts, all my concepts. So ultimately, it is going to help you, right? Okay, coming back to self-help groups. Coming back to self-help groups, these can be either registered or unregistered groups of micro entrepreneurs having homogeneous social and economic background, voluntarily coming together to save small amounts regularly. They mutually agree to contribute to a common fund and meet their requirements, any kind of needs, on mutual help basis. Now just think about this. When you say that these are mostly micro entrepreneurs, they need not only be micro entrepreneurs. Just think of women from a locality coming together just to inculcate a spirit of saving, a habit of saving, or maybe to start a small business. They come together, they say that if I'm alone, I'm not able to save more than 1,000 rupees in a year. But if we come together, if everyone here, let's say we are 10-15 people, if everyone contributes 100 rupees every month, which will not be much because that is the amount we usually save. But if we look at the amount, it will go up to 10,000. If alone I was able to, say, save 1,000 rupees, if it is 10 of us, we can save 10,000 rupees. And with those 10,000 rupees, either we can start a venture of our own, or maybe we can take this pool or consider this pool for our credit needs. So one of the women might think that next year my children are moving, or my children have to take admission in a college. Now to get them admitted in a college, we'll need funds, we'll need money. If we go to the bank asks about collateral. If we go to the bank, they say no, we cannot provide you with loan. Or say they have to create any kind of infrastructure within their house, they have to get it renovated. So there is no availability of loan from the bank or credit from the bank. If you go to the money lender, the amount of interest that they charge is very high. So they mutually come together. They decide that let's every month or every 15 days, let's put in this amount of money to this pool, which can either be lended to any of the members, which can also be used as a collateral with the bank, so that we can take a bigger loan and start a venture of our own. Or it can also simply be help us with the habit of saving, because there might be, say, 5 to 7 members out of that group of 10 who would say that we are not planning to start any venture, we do not have any urgent needs, so we just want to have this habit of saving every month. And also it'll be good for our community, because that ways we can have a better bond. Coming back to the definition of self-help groups, these can be either registered or unregistered group of micro entrepreneurs having homogeneous social and economic background. That means generally they'll come from a similar background. They can be women coming from the same caste, they can be people coming from the same kind of economic background, say the weaker section, who come together voluntarily, start saving small amounts regularly, that every month or every 15 days or every week they're going to contribute 10 rupees to the fund, and they create this common fund for any kinds of urgent needs, or maybe to start a business venture, to help each other. So this way, if you think, rather than relying on the government for their empowerment, rather than relying on the banking system for their empowerment, rather than relying on any other section of the society for their empowerment, people are coming together to help themselves. And that's why the name is self-help groups. They are helping themselves, creating this pool. Now, you'll find when you look at self-help groups, mostly these are groups of women. These are groups of women, primarily in the rural areas, who come together and take up this act. Now, you think what can be the benefits of it? Just think about what can be the benefits of it. Benefits of this, these SHGs. So one is they have now cheap availability of credit. Second, if they are trying to help each other, just think of the cooperation and collaboration they'll have in each and every aspect. And when we are saying that these are primarily groups of women, it will lead to women empowerment. Then the burden or the responsibility of empowering these sections is now shifted on the people themselves. They are going to help themselves. Also, they can use that money that they have gathered as a fund. They can use this pool, they can use this fund to keep as a collateral with the bank, and the banks will provide them loan with which they can start any kind of activity, which money can be used for any other purpose. And also, because that fund does not belong to any individual, it belongs to the group. Now this group will actually have a subtle pressure, on the individual to whom that money is allocated, or the person who has taken that credit, to repay that loan on time. Because as an individual, you might not have the discipline, you might not be sincere about fulfilling or about repaying your loan. But once you become a member of the group, there'll be a subtle pressure that I have to repay the loan. So in this sense, it can become an advantage to everyone. So these self-help groups can lead to empowerment of various socio-economically weaker sections. And again, you remember that we are not saying that these are only groups of women, but primarily most of these self-help groups are actually they actually have women members, female members. Now let's look at various other features of these self-help groups. So I hope you have understood the idea, right? If most of you might be coming from urban areas, so you might not be able to relate, because primarily these are based in rural areas. So if you look at your say people, or say mostly your businessmen, small businessmen, what they'll do is they'll start contributing this money. They 5 or 10 of them will come together, they start contributing equal money, or say 100 rupees, 500 rupees, 1000 rupees every month. They start putting it in a fund, and any of the businessmen, say for the sake of expansion, for any other urgent need, if they need that money, they can take this money as credit from the group. And the group, because again this is happening on a mutual cooperation basis, they will either charge no rate of interest, or they'll charge very minimal rate of interest. Because otherwise, if the businessman goes to a money lender or any other lending facility, you'll find that they'll be charged with higher interest. So it is for mutual benefit of all, because the other businessman would know that the person will start repaying the loan, and tomorrow if I need money, I can also take this money at zero or very low rate of interest. So now we are saying that these are economically homogeneous groups, that people generally coming from the same section of the society, from the same class, will form these groups, because they are the ones who will understand each other's needs better. They are the ones who will understand each other's challenges better. So they'll form this group based on mutual agreement. Now this is formed by the process of self-selection, that it is with the mutual consent, or it is people coming from the same group who decide amongst themselves. Now this is based, rather than being a formal organization, it is based on the closeness or affinity or likeness of the members. Because ultimately, because they want to cooperate with each other, because they like each other, they are coming from same class, same section, that is the reason they have formed this group. Another thing is, these are mostly women groups, as already highlighted, and also you'll find most of these self-help groups concentrated in the southern part of the country, in South India. Mostly women group concentrated in southern part of the country. The size is generally between 10 to 20. Yes, there can be bigger, larger self-help groups. So someone was suggesting about Seva. So it is, for that matter, a bigger group. But generally, you'll find the size to be between 10 to 20, because ultimately they should be the ones who are living in the vicinity. They should be the ones who are living in that area. And if you think about it, they should be conducting regular meetings, because the bank say if they want to take credit from bank, the bank says they look into these records, that how frequently are they conducting those meetings, are all the members joining those meetings or not, whether they are keeping the minutes of the meetings, whether they are maintaining any kind of credit that has been given to any member. They should be maintaining records for that. So the banks look into all these aspects, because why would otherwise bank lend, say, 100 rupees for a 10 rupee fund? If you have contributed to the fund and the entire corpus comes up to 10 rupees, why would the bank want to lend more money? The bank looks into all these aspects apart from the pool. And you find that these self-help groups have actually better record of repaying the debt compared to your regular banking facility, compared to your other businesses and individuals. And that data has been included. Afterwards, I'll show you. So these will be smaller groups. Why? Because they have to conduct meetings, regular meetings. They have very well defined laws. So they will decide the frequency of the meeting. They'll decide the amount which has to be contributed. They have to decide the frequency of the contribution, that whether you have to contribute that money in 15 days, 20 days, 1 month. They will also decide, they also have rules as to whether the leadership, because there needs to be a leader. There should be someone who takes care of all the activities. There should be someone who maintains the book. There should be someone who takes that fund, who should be the treasurer of that fund. So they have all these rules very well defined in the bylaws. So if they have to conduct regular meetings, they should be coming from the same area. Now, these institutions are again independent of the government. They are self-managed institutions. They take all the decisions together, right? So they deliberate, they discuss amongst themselves and take these decisions for that matter. Now, just think about what can be the problems. Just think about what can be the problems with all this. Just think of problems on the level of operations of these self-help groups. Think about the problems related to the members, because we are saying primarily these are female members. See, funding can become a problem because there might be a possibility that they are not able to contribute in time. Yes, they're working on a very small scale. Then also, Jhansi is saying that there can be ego clashes. So think about this. Say from the same village, there are women who come together. Now these people are, or these women are from the same class, from the same section, same economic section, but they are from different castes. So because there might be issues, there can be issues which arise out of the differences in caste. Yes, there can be quarrels among them. Then also, if you think about bookkeeping, think of rural women. Think of rural women. Do you think that everyone might have expertise to keep the records? It might happen that one of the members of the group might have these skills and they take up all the charge, or they take up all the responsibility. And it can happen so that in the future, they might actually overpower all the other members. Then they start taking all the decisions by themselves, because all the other women, they are not educated, they are not literate. And they might misuse this group. They might misuse those funds. Then the treasurer who has all the funds might escape, might abscond. They might take all the money, they might take credit from bank and then escape. Then also these self-help groups can rely on other members. So for example, in the vicinity or in the neighborhood, there is a retired teacher, or there is a student who say is studying in college, going for higher education. Now they would know, they can definitely help them, but can also say misuse those funds, or may take advantage out of the innocence of these people, of the group members. Okay, so you are talking about meeting. So you are saying that conducting these regular meetings can become an issue, because now these women who have to work within their household, take care of their household responsibility, now they have this additional burden of conducting these regular meetings, dual burden of work. Then the household or the family of that member can actually stop them from doing this. So it might happen so that within next 1.5 years, the SHG becomes a success. The women together start a small business and it takes a good turn. It takes a positive turn, and the family members, or particularly the husband, can become jealous that how is it that she is earning more than me, and they can stop them from taking or becoming a part of that self-help group. It can also lead to domestic violence, etc. Okay, so non-cooperation from family, then any issue that arises in community can become a part of it. Takeover by husband after success, yes. They might see, generally they will start small scale business. Then you have examples of Lizzat Papad, etc., which can become a big business later on. Okay, then also if they are taking credit from bank, someone might default on the on repaying part, right? Someone might default. There can be NPAs there as well. Even though we are saying the NPAs, non-performing assets, are way less compared to our regular banking system, but yes, there definitely are non-performing assets. Okay, so just think about the features and think about the problems first. So we have already looked at a few of these challenges. Now you remember that there are a lot of NGOs and banks who start these self-help groups, because even banks have to fulfill the criteria of priority lending. So these banks also start that. NGOs also start these self-help groups. Now even the governments will start having a competition amongst themselves, that see, we have so many number of NGOs, and this has happened in the past. So rather than looking at the objective of these of these self-help groups, the governments might get fixated and might approach these self-help groups in a target-based manner, in a targeted approach. There can be bureaucratic hurdles that these SHGs can face. There can be intervention from the government. These SHGs can become politicized later. With the benefit is, yes, the women are getting socially, economically empowered, that we will come to, but to think of other problems, that these self-help groups might get politicized. These self-help groups can be used by certain individuals for ulterior motives. These SHGs, at times you find that they are not able to, these members are not able to contribute on a regular basis, and you find that it can become a problem later. That these SHGs, yes, they'll be formed, but they would not sustain. And you have a problem of these SHGs not being able to sustain because of the funding aspect. So similarly, all the other issues have been mentioned. Now, just remember this, the way we have arranged it, we're talking about various issues related to SHGs. Now, these issues can come from the society. These issues can be related to women. These issues can be political and administrative in nature. These issues can be related to lack of skills in these women. So these problems can come from various aspects. Now, why I'm saying this, you already find a question in the past which was asked on a specific dimension, that is role of women. If you remember, in role of women, I had shown you a question which was talking about the role of self-help groups in women empowerment and what are the challenges, right? So yes, we can see that these can lead to women empowerment, but what can be the challenges? So they can ask a question on a specific dimension. So please just go through these challenges, and there's nothing that you would not be able to understand. With the basic discussion we had, and we will discuss that question, do not worry about it, we will discuss that question. All these aspects that we have discussed are mentioned there, and maybe a couple more. So if you think of spread of SHGs, if it might be mentioned somewhere, the spread of SHGs, you find that mostly these SHGs are there in your urban, in your rural areas. So you find a lack of spread in your urban and semi-urban areas. Then your southern states have more number of SHGs compared to your northern states. These have already been highlighted. Now coming back to the objective. So we have already discussed why it can help these weaker sections to empower themselves. It can help in capacity building of the poor. They encourage the habit of savings amongst the poor. They can avail credit at zero or less interest. They can get collateral free loans, because these are the problems because of which they came together. Then it can actually help these individuals to create self-employment opportunities. With that pool of money, they can start a small business, say of weaving, say of tailoring. Then ultimately, because of this organization, because of this cooperation amongst people, cooperation amongst the members of the group, you'll find that they will feel empowered. They'll have less insecurity amongst themselves. And we were saying, if you remember, we were saying that insecurity is one of the major reasons when it comes to various issues. So it deals with all these issues, all these problems. So benefits in the economic in the economic dimension, you can think of economic empowerment of women, economic empowerment of weaker sections, getting loan at a cheaper rate, and also you find that the repayment rates are very high. They're more than, say, 90% in your southern states. Now again, government is basically shifting the responsibility on the people, on these sections themselves, so that they take care of themselves. Rather than government providing microfinances, rather than banks providing these finances, let people help themselves. It ultimately helps these individuals enhance the contribution to their household income. Yes, so it will help them become more financially independent. Then socio-cultural benefits can be, now the people coming from weaker sections, what we were saying, that these are people who are powerless, who do not have any political power, who do not have any say in the society, who do not have any say within the family. So the economic empowerment of these people will give them a voice within their family, within the society. Ultimately, if these women are socially empowered, it will lead to better health outcomes, it will lead to better educational outcomes. Now they'll better understand all the issues that are happening around them. They can become a part of any kind of social movement. These aware women or these aware individuals can become a part of any kind of social awareness movement. They'll have more self-respect, they'll have more self-confidence, and ultimately they're helping each other. So the idea of social accountability also comes into picture. So they know that they have to help each other, because the organization is based solely in the idea of cooperation. Then it can lead to their political empowerment, because tomorrow they can become leaders of their own villages, right? They can become a part of the Panchayati Raj institutions. They can actually help mobilize people. So all the women, or say a self-help group which has done well in that particular village, they will make all the other women aware as well, that okay, these are our issues, let's vote this particular individual who will ultimately take care of our issues. So they can help with lobbying. So these can be the various benefits of your self-help groups. We have already looked at the challenges. You can, from this, you can think of the way forward. Okay, with question, we will think of the way forward. What is more vocal? So they'll be more vocal in the sense they will now be able to assert their rights. Now they would be able to make their voice reach the society, or the say political dispensation, that this is what our demands are, this is what our needs are, and you have to address these needs. That is what it means. So yes, they will become a part of this participative democracy, right? It will ultimately lead to a participative democracy. Now, just look at these two ideas. Just look at these two ideas, that promotion of these self-help groups can be seen as responsibility shifting by the government. As we are saying that rather than government empowering these groups or government helping these weaker sections, they are becoming responsible for their own empowerment, for their own betterment. So which is in a way a good idea, but also it reflects poorly on the government, in the sense that the government is not contributing or is not helping the weaker sections. And rather than helping them, it is shifting the responsibility on them. But it is a good means to empower. And if you remember, when we were talking about development and empowerment, we were looking at a few differences. Now, development means development of all. It is mostly top down. But when we think of empowerment, it is bottom up. So the individuals are empowering themselves. The individuals are empowering the community. The individuals are responsible for their own betterment and for the betterment of the entire society. That is what the difference is. So even though it might look like responsibility shifting by the government, but it is ultimately better. So the way you find that when it comes to your education, ultimately the responsibility lies with you. We can fulfill our responsibility of teaching you, providing you with content. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with you, whether you will practice or not, whether you will improve based on the suggestions provided by us or not, which is better for you, because ultimately you should be in charge of your own life. Then the second idea is these SHGs can enforce gender stereotypes. Now, just think about this. How can these SHGs enforce gender stereotypes? So, Pyle is asking, how can SHGs be used in an alternative? So, I think you are talking about ulterior motives. ulterior motives. I think you are asking about that they can become politicized. So there can be, say, individuals or political leaders in the community who might use these successful SHGs for their own betterment. They might say, they might tell the self-help group leader that, okay, I will say help you with so and so if you help me mobilize this vote bank, if you help me get more votes, for example. So yes, let's think about gender stereotypes. Now, the first stereotype is, so Shweta, you're right when you're saying that these are mostly run by women members, but that is not a stereotype, gender stereotype. But the stereotype can be thought of in the sense that even when it comes to banks and NGOs, they consider by default that it is the women who need to be empowered. It is the women who are a part of this weaker section, and hence these. Similarly, if you move ahead, think of the kind of task or kind of works or entrepreneurial activities that they take up. They take up mostly the kind of work related to weaving, tailoring, etc., that is generally associated with women, right? Okay, so just think about this. See, they consist of women members is a good thing. It is not directly about enforcing any kind of gender stereotype, but the gender stereotype is considering these women to be weak, considering that women are weaker, and hence we need more women self-help groups, and also the kind of activities that they take up. That is how they enforce these gender stereotypes. Now just look at this simple question which says suggest measures to make self-help groups more impactful. So basically it is talking about the way forward. It talks about making them more sustainable, impactful and transformative for the weaker sections of the society. Suggest measures to make these self-help groups more impactful, sustainable and transformative for the weaker sections of the society. So the first thing is your introduction. What kind of introduction can we think of? Then comes your body part, and hence your conclusion. Now let's first think of the body part. What can be the measures to make these self-help groups more impactful, sustainable and transformative for the weaker sections of the society? Now you come up with various suggestions to the challenges that we have looked into, but think of how it will make them more impactful. How it will make them more impactful. How it will make them more sustainable and transformative. So when you talk about sustainable, the sustainability can come from having, say, adequate financial resources. The sustainability can happen or can be ensured with training these human resources so that the SHG doesn't fall apart. Okay, capacity building of the individuals or the members of the SHGs. Now think of the role that your NGOs and other civil society organizations can play in capacity building, right? Then the government can also help in the capacity building, great. Now, Akash, you are saying advertise their objective. Rather than advertising their objective, just think of using the examples of successful self-help groups to motivate people to take up or to create these self-help groups. So it can come from advertising their success rather than objective, right? So the objective, yes, also objective has to be advertised or not advertised, but people have to be made more aware about the benefits of SHGs. Along with the benefits of SHGs, advertise the success of various self-help groups. Yes, so learnings from previously successful self-help groups. Great. Now think of these self-help groups being mostly or having mostly women or female members. and we are talking about weaker sections. Apart from women, can there be other weaker sections or not? So yes, you can think of the body part, you can think of various suggestions from the problems that we have highlighted. Just think of, can there be other weaker sections of the society apart from women? And the answer is yes. So when it comes to your introduction, maybe you can highlight the other weaker sections, right? You can highlight the other weaker sections which can actually benefit out of these self-help groups. Can you suggest any other examples or any other introductions? Right, so yes, you're talking about the differently abled sections, you're talking about your economically weaker sections, you're talking about your SCs and STs, etc. So yes, great. So Santosh is coming back with a suggestion and saying that the government, and rather than government, you can just think of the roles your civil society itself can play to help these SHGs who are taking up any kind of entrepreneurial activity to advertise, to promote their product. And the same lines, you can think of the digital means, for that matter, to market their products. Okay, apart from this, can you think of any other introduction? So maybe you can talk about the significance of HGOs or the benefits of HGOs, SHGs briefly. Right, you can talk about the benefits of these self-help groups briefly. So yes, Pyle is suggesting that maybe we can think of how we can use these self-help groups for the welfare of society. But now, if you think about it, that is what the body part is oriented towards. So yes, you can extend it as an introduction and maybe think of any other introduction. So both ways it is right. It is not going to be a problem. Okay, so Ambesh is talking about why SHGs are popular only in rural areas and not in urban areas, and how we can popularize them in urban areas. So maybe we can think of the challenges. In conclusion, maybe we can think of the challenges briefly and come up with suggestions for the same. Come up with suggestions, right? Okay, so this is a fairly simple question. This is just for you to consolidate all these suggestions in one place, right? So those suggestions will range from your, so how you can improve the status of women, right? Because ultimately, if the women are not, if the women are not being allowed by the family to conduct these meetings or to take up the self-help group related work, how would it help? So you can just think of various dimensions of the challenges and these solutions to the same. Now let's look at another question that has been asked in the past. Can the vicious cycle of gender inequality, poverty, and malnutrition be broken through microfinancing of women self-help groups? Can the vicious cycle of gender inequality, poverty, and malnutrition be broken through microfinancing of women self-help groups? And we have to explain with examples. Now, when you think of examples, the examples are mentioned here because these examples will come directly from your current affairs. So when you go through your current affairs, just keep looking for any kind of positive role that any civil society has played, because they can ask a direct question, right? So it was in the news, question was asked. So keep mentioning those examples. Keep mentioning those examples in your notes. So the examples will come from these two articles. You can just go through these. Just think of the question that they have asked, because yes, it is simple. We can think of how the benefits of SHGs can be mentioned here, right, in all these three directions. But they are talking about the vicious cycle. They're talking about the vicious cycle. So it is better. The best part is, rather than thinking of any other introduction, you can think of explaining this vicious cycle briefly, explaining these vicious cycles briefly in the introduction. Because just think about it, just think about it, just think of any, say, vicious cycle of poverty, or think of the vicious cycle of gender inequality. So the women are not being treated equally, hence they have a lower socio-economic status. Because of this socio-economic status, they are not being treated equally, right? So how do you break this? To empower them, by empowering them socio-economically, right? So their empowerment will ultimately break this vicious cycle of gender inequality. Similarly, empowerment of these women can break the vicious cycle of poverty and malnutrition as well. So I think we have discussed all these things with women, with poverty, with malnutrition, so should not be a problem. But the introduction can be limited to explaining these vicious cycles, and then your body part will talk about how you can break this vicious cycle using these SHGs. So just please suggest. It is not as complicated a question that it might seem, it might look like. It is a fairly simple question. Just please suggest if you can write this answer, because I would want you to write this answer. There are other questions to which I have provided the solution. Can you write this answer? Okay, because this, to write this answer, you should have good writing skills, for that matter. Should have good writing skills. Okay, so for the ones who have not understood, the question is asking you to explain the role of women SHGs, to explain the role of women SHGs in women empowerment and hence in tackling these problems, to helping these sections come out of these vicious cycles. So think about this. With, if you say, promote these women SHGs, what will happen is these women will become economically empowered. That is the first step. Then with their economic empowerment, they'll be able to spend more for the nutritional requirements of the family. They'll contribute more to the family income. Their children can go to school, hence breaking the cycle of poverty. The children will get adequate nutrition, hence breaking the cycle of malnutrition. With this economic empowerment, we are reaching towards gender equality. With this economic empowerment of women, we get social empowerment of women. They'll have better status in the society. They'll have better say in the matters of the family. Now, if they have better say, if they have better social status, socioeconomic status, it will lead, the empowerment would not be just limited to themselves. They will try to make others aware as well. It can lead to awareness and hence empowerment of other sections of the society, of other women in their community as well. So that the good impact of these SHGs, or the empowerment of the members of the SHG, would not be limited to that group, but it will extend to the society at large. How to confine this introduction within 2 to 3 lines? The examples can be taken up from these articles. The examples can be taken up from these articles. Just go through these articles, you'll get the examples. Okay, so one question is that how to confine this introduction within 2 to 3 lines. Now just think about this. All these aspects are related with each other. Gender inequality can lead to a problem of malnutrition. Gender inequality can lead to feminization of poverty, etc. But we do not have to limit it to women. Gender inequality is just one aspect of it. So what you have to do is, you have to portray within 2, 3, 4 lines maximum, that how the microfinancing of SHGs, of women SHGs, can lead to women empowerment. So you can say that the microfinancing these women SHGs can lead to socio-economic empowerment of the women. So socio-economic empowerment directly implies that the gender inequality gap is reducing. The gender inequality gap is reducing. Similarly, in the next line, you can talk about how these women with better resources, or how the members of this group can contribute to the family income, and with better family income, with better household income, they can come out of the cycle of poverty. They can help with more awareness, and with more resources they can invest adequately on malnutrition. So even if you write just do these 2-3 lines, that will be more than sufficient. And another idea is to start with examples, right? Another idea is to start with examples, but they are saying that you have to explain with examples. So it is better you use these examples contained in these articles with the pointers in the body part, and then think of the conclusion. Now conclusion can be creative, right? Conclusion can be creative. Can you think? Okay, so Abhishek is saying SHGs can work to elevate various issues of women, but we need to put efforts when it comes to other measures like education, etc., etc. Okay, great. Now, Abhishek, you can frame it in a way that without mentioning the challenges that these SHGs are facing, you can just show a way forward. And I think that's what you meant, but maybe you framed it in a slightly different manner. Okay, great. So in conclusion, Amesh is saying that rather than sticking to only the role of women SHGs, we can think of other ways to break these vicious cycles apart from SHGs. Great. That can also be done. That can be done in the introduction. But introduction, I would think, I think of explaining these vicious cycles. And yes, it can come in the suggestion part. So in the conclusion, you can suggest way forward. You can just think of the issues in your head and come up with suggestions. One. Second is, you can think of other ways of breaking these vicious cycles. And that will be enough to conclude your answer. Yes, so great. This is also there. You can think of the government intervention to microfinance SHGs. Great. Or yes, Vaishnav is saying that we can think of other benefits apart from breaking of these vicious cycles. Great. So you have 3, 4, 5 conclusions, and this is just heartwarming to see that most of you are now contributing to the discussion. And see, if say would not have discussed, I would have told you maybe 1 or 2 kinds of conclusions or introductions. Now with your inputs, you get multiple perspectives, multiple ideas, and with this you also understand that there is not just one way to write an answer. There's no perfect answer as such, right? So the structure has to be so structure remains the same, but within that structure you can exercise the flexibility. Okay, moving on to the next question. The penetration of self-help groups in rural areas is promoting participation in development is facing socio-cultural hurdles. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the specific socio-cultural dimension or socio-cultural challenges related to self-help groups. What will be contained here? You know that very well, right? So the body part is not going to be a problem. You have to just write socio-cultural hurdles. Now think of your conclusion. Your conclusion will obviously be based in various suggestions to overcome these socio-cultural hurdles. Right? It will be based in various suggestions to overcome these socio-cultural hurdles. When they say examine, you just also give a glimpse of how how these these SHGs are overcoming these social cultural hurdles. So introduction, yes, okay, let me cover the introduction so that you understand that idea better. Introduction can be about other hurdles apart from socio-economic hurdles, socio-cultural hurdles, other hurdles. Then it can be related to examples or instances from your newspapers of a failure because of socio-cultural hurdles. Okay, that is fine. Now come back to the body part. So one thing is that we know that self-help groups are facing other hurdles as well apart from socio-cultural. Also, what we have to think about is that because of various socio-cultural factors, becoming reason for success. Various socio-cultural factors becoming a reason for the success of these SHGs. You just give a glimpse of it. In your body part. Now, what can be socio-cultural factors? Now, these SHGs, the hurdles that they can face is about your gender-based discrimination. Various socio-cultural hurdles can be extended to caste, that people coming from different caste, it can become a hurdle. The mindset of the society, the patriarchal setup, etc. All these things are covered, which we have discussed. Now think of various socio-cultural factors which, rather than becoming a hurdle, are becoming a reason for their success. Unity among the group, the cooperation among the group, right? So these people coming from weaker sections cooperating amongst themselves to make this a huge success. Great. No, Prashant, the idea of every action having or attracting an equal and opposite reaction cannot be extended to social issues. See, yes, opposite, we are fine with it. There will be opposite reaction to every action. For example, backlash to globalization. For example, in every aspect you'll find, right? But it need not be equal. Newton's law is fine, but it need not be equal. So trust among the members. Now you find that because of this cooperation, it can also lead to their success. Familiarity of the members, yes, because they're coming from the same neighborhood, same community. Generally, these are homogeneous groups, so it might not become a hurdle. Rather, it can become a reason for their success. Okay. So this was the question. Just think about this. The penetration of self-help groups in rural areas in promoting participation in development programs is facing socio-cultural hurdles. Examine. So what we are saying is we can introduce with maybe an example of any self-help group failing because of socio-cultural hurdles. If there is any data related to that, any kind of facts related to that, we can start with that. Other idea is to start with other hurdles that can lead to a failure of SHG or other hurdles faced by your SHGs. Then coming to the body part, we think of various socio-cultural hurdles, and also we think of various socio-cultural factors which can become a reason for success, but it has to be kept very brief. Then we can conclude with suggestions to the problems or the socio-cultural hurdles that we have highlighted. So I've given a few things here. You can just go through it. All the factors have been written, have been mentioned here. These have been mentioned previously as well, but you'll get everything in one place. So, okay, you just try writing that answer and then you go through this. Now, think about how do SHGs sometimes fall short in addressing the root causes of poverty and inequality in a region. Okay, so before looking at the answer, which has been provided in the next slide, what you have to do is, because today we have say overshot the time already, you have a webinar, so consider this as your homework. Just try to conceptualize this question. You have the answer, but please, it is for your own betterment. Please do try conceptualizing this question before you look at the answer in the next slide. caste has already been mentioned. Okay, so with this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll go through this question and we'll think of the structure, and then we'll move on to cooperative society and ultimately your design and implementation related issues with your policies. Thank you, everyone. Good night.